Good afternoon, patrons, and welcome to the October 2018 Patroncast. Oh yes, it is time for the Patroncast. It is that time of month again, and I'm very tired. Very tired this month, because obviously, you joined me in the period of, you joined me in the busiest time of the year, full stop, because obviously, it makes sense to launch all the big games right next to each other. and in the case of Fallout 76 and Hitman 2 and Crusader Kings 2 Holy Fury in the same 2 flipping days. And it's a new Fallout game, and obviously, we're best known for Fallout, so we're going to be doing a whole lot of that, so that's going to be a lot busier too. But this is actually a lot more stressful than the Fallout 4 launch was, because let me tell you how the Fallout 4 launch went, which is, we got ourselves a copy of, it was the Xbox One version. That was a few days before Fallout 4 actually came out. Obviously, we were under NDA, we couldn't talk about it till the embargo, so, we recorded, I think I had time to record the opening, going through the vault, coming out, exploring Sanctuary Hills, going over to Concord, doing the Raider fight over there, Power Armor, Deathclaw, taking the Minutemen back to Sanctuary Hills, doing their little setting up Sanctuary Hills quest. I think that was pretty much all I had time for. I didn't have the game very long before it was time to put together the video. So that was all I really had time to do before it was time to rush out a video just in time for, the actual embargo. But, we had the game. Once I had the game in my hands, I was allowed to play it. Fallout 76, because, they can't give early access to YouTubers in any way aside from, obviously, they literally shipped us over to the private session in West Virginia. But, that was enough. That was enough doing that once. That's a very long way to go. There's no international airport in West Virginia, so I had to fly to Washington. And then actually get a tiny plane. I don't like tiny planes. I'm claustrophobic. So small places, don't agree with each other. Not in the slightest. So being on a tiny plane where if you stand up, your head is actually brushing against the top of it. That's no good. That's no good at all. So that wasn't fun. That most definitely wasn't fun. Actually, is this the first Patroncast since I went to West Virginia? No, I remember now. The last Patroncast was just after I got back, so I was able to talk about the fact that I'd done the trip, but I couldn't tell you anything about the game at that point because it was before the embargo. Don't worry, I'm all caught up now. Now I know what I'm doing. So anyway, yes, and what I was saying, the actual point I was trying to get to there was, Fallout 76, obviously, they can't just let us in. They probably could find a way to let us in, but if they did, then the game would be empty. There'd be no one else there, there'd be no other camps, there'd be no one to trade with, and sure, I suppose it would be an interesting experiment into how the game works from a single player's point of view, but it wouldn't be representative of the game. I don't think it would be a fair representation, so I can see why they don't want to actually do that. So, as a result, I'm stuck in the same beta windows as everyone else is in. And they've not always been well set up for the UK. The first one was midnight to 4 a.m. in the UK. And after I did that, because that was on the Xbox, consoles are a bit more difficult to record off, by the way. PC is very easy to record off, because I can just basically turn on Shadowplay, then turn it straight off again, and that's fine. For recording consoles, I've got a capture card. I've got an Elgato HD60, which is a nice little card, great little card, lovely thing. But it's a little bit on the slow side. Once you've recorded a certain period of time, it needs to spend a bit of time crunching that into an actual form that I can actually plug into a video editor. So, I was working until I think about 10 past 4 in the morning, and then I needed to be just kind of sitting up for another half an hour or something, waiting for the Elgato to finish crunching that into an actual MP4, and then I wanted to actually, take that and put it into a program to make sure it's actually working correctly, because, if there's a problem, I'd like to know immediately. Not that there's anything I can really do to fix it, but, otherwise I'd just be worrying about it and I won't be able to sleep. I like kind of taking a file the moment I've made it and putting it straight into a video editor so I can check whether it's working or not. So I was just on Twitter talking about my experience on the beta while I was just waiting for that to happen. I think I got to bed at about 5 a.m. I think it was about 5 a.m. The first night. After that, it wasn't so bad. The 2 sessions at the weekend were more reasonable, if I recall correctly. Hang on, what were the other sessions? Yes, they were only the 2-hour sessions. So it was 10 p.m. to midnight, and then I think it was 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. So they were fine. They were absolutely fine. But we're back into it. I'm recording this on Thursday. It is Thursday, the 1st of November when I'm recording this. And the mega session that's about to occur, after, of course, the one on Tuesday, which was, that was till 3 a.m. That was 11 p.m. till 3 a.m., but that was actually on PC, so I didn't have to wait around so long after it was done. This one tonight is 6 p.m. to... They've just actually extended it, so it's 6 p.m. to, I think, 3 a.m. UK time. I might, for the first time, just 'cause that's a really long session, I might not do all of it, because hopefully I can get in at about 10 to 6. Normally they open the service just a little bit early. Like, if you're there early, you can get in. So I'm hoping I can get in about 10 to 6, maybe go through to about 1 a.m., and that's hopefully going to be enough to make, the next few parts of the new main Fallout 76 series, and then we'll be okay for the time being. So, yeah, then the pressure will be off a little bit. I might actually skip Saturdays because there'll be fireworks displays all over the shop because of Bonfire Night. So I might just go out for, some fireworks displays and, have dinner with Claire or whatever on Saturday. So that'd be nice. So I might skip Saturday's beta because there is another one on Sunday, which is... hang on, how long is that one? Actually, that one's really long as well. That one is, another 7 hours. I think it's... 7 p.m. through to 2 a.m. UK time. So if I find myself short on footage, I can do Sundays. And that, honestly, at that point, is probably going to be enough footage that if I really wanted to, I could not record again until the game was actually out. And then I can just play it whenever I want during the day. And that will be absolutely flipping lovely. That will be so lovely. So there's been quite a lot of all-nighters and late nights going into this. So, I was jet lagged from West Virginia, and then as soon as I got over that, it was time to start working until 5 a.m, 3 a.m, another 3 a.m. today if I decide to do the full session. So I'm quite tired at the minute, and my sleep schedule has been thrown completely off. And it doesn't help. The plumbing situation's got worse, by the way. Remember how I talked about the weird hole in the wall previously? That's still not fixed. But we found a new problem, which is, a pipe that was dripping. So we summoned a plumber to sort that out, and he did, but somehow while he was fixing that, he managed to break the water pump that we need to make our hot water work. So we're waiting for that to be fixed now, but unfortunately while waiting for that, we don't have hot water. So this morning, I had a freezing cold shower, which I'm going to describe as bracing. Very, very bracing. Indeed. So that was fun. So aside from the tiredness and aside from all of that, which hopefully is now over, my biggest headache right now is trying to figure out how the hell I'm actually going to arrange Fallout 76. Because Fallout 76 is an odd thing. Because previously every Fallout game, it's pretty simple really. You begin a character and you take that character through the main plot of the Fallout game because they've all been single player action RPG things. Fine. Nice and simple. And then, probably I start over at the highest difficulty or with a particular rule set or whatever. Nice and easy to do. But because this is the first multiplayer Fallout, that throws up all sorts of interesting things. So, obviously I'm in discussions right now with various other people that I would like to do other things with them. Some of them will just be little one-off guest appearances. There's discussions for more kind of shared series. They're going to bounce forward back and forth between a couple of channels. Now, how exactly we label all of this has been a real headache. What I've settled on is what was formerly called Fallout 76 Beta, i.e. the stuff I recorded on Xbox. That's all been retroactively renamed Fallout 76 Xbox Beta. Now, the PC footage that I've just begun, that's just going to be called straight up Fallout 76 and then Fallout 76 Part 2, Part 3, etc. Because the plan right now is I'll probably take that save file and that will move forward into the main release because progress is going to carry forward. As long as you're not actually changing platform, you can actually carry all progress forward from the beta into the main game. You just can't move it between Xbox and PS4 and PC and whatever. So as a result of that, this is basically going to be probably the same character. Though it's weird to actually talk about a character in this game because, there's no actual speech checks or speech or conversations. There's no morality system and you can basically just go back into the character designer anytime you want. So as a result of that, you can just change your face and your hair and your gender and your body type at literally any time of your fancy. So in some ways, there's not really the same concept of a character in this game as there has been in previous Fallout games. But, this is going to be the same character progression, if you like. The same set of perks, the same special decisions are going to carry forward. So I'm just going to call the PC version I've begun now just Fallout 76 Part 2, Part 3, and so on, and we'll just run from the beta into the base game, noting as we go, of course, if there are any major changes as they make kind of balance changes. Because sure, there'll be changes from what you're seeing now to what will be at launch, absolutely. In fact, I'm already seeing changes, like the changes from the previous Xbox beta into the PC version, and I'm assuming this would be true on the Xbox as well. They've clearly made some changes to the drop rate of certain more advanced components. So robots are dropping way more advanced components than they used to be. People and medkits seem to have a much higher propensity for containing chems. They seem to be floating around a lot more commonly than they were before. So, it's really interesting to watch the changes as time goes by. But that's going to keep happening after the game comes out. That's not going to be like exclusive to the beta period. They're going to keep patching and changing and rebalancing on an ongoing basis. So I don't see that as a barrier to actually kind of carrying on at this point and just starting what I consider to be the main series. But of course, this then starts kind of raising questions, like when I do a collab, should it or should it not sit within the numbering system? So I will say there is a plan that before we get to part 5 of the new series, one of those episodes, I don't know which one exactly, and I'm not sure whether this will happen, but this is the plan, one of those episodes will feature a guest. And I'm planning to structure the guest appearances. So each guest is doing something special. So, me and them go on an adventure of some description. So, for example, some of you may have noticed on Twitter, I slightly lightheartedly reached out to Oxhorn. Haven't actually been able to get in contact with Oxhorn just yet, but, he does a lot of lore stuff, so I think it would be really cool for me and him to go on a lore hunt together. And, I'm speaking to someone else and saying, hey, there's these treasure maps. I happen to have picked up a bunch of treasure maps. How about we do some treasure hunting together? Where, when we're together, we can play the game, but, we've actually got the structure of saying we're actually going to do the treasure hunting together today, and we're going to go and find the treasure, and diddly-diddly-dee. So, I want them to have actual structure. It's not just going to be, okay, I'm doing the exact same thing you saw last time, but there's just going to be a second person I'm going to be chatting with while I'm doing it. I want guest appearances to be special. I want them to be events, and I want, a specific activity that they're built around. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. And I think if they're, one-offs, they probably will be part of the numbered main series. But if they're an ongoing series, that would be a side thing where I try and not do any big progress, where it's just you'll see what I mean. I don't want to spoil it yet because I've got something very specific in mind that's hopefully going to be starting next week. By the time you hear this, about a week away. So keep your eyes out for that. But I've got something special planned that I think will work quite nicely as a side series. The big question, though, is where live streams fit into it, because Fallout 76 is almost uniquely perfect to be a live stream, because it's a game where, there's a lot of exploring, there's a lot of quiet moments, there's a lot of downtime where you just kind of, you're going around to location, you're looting, you're taking things back to a workbench and you're scrapping it, and, you get your camp out and you slap your camp down, and, you go in, you do a little bit of building there, and you just kind of tinker with your own camp, and then, you might find a really interesting location that's actually got a mission, and there might be an event, and, there'll be a mad 10 minutes where loads of stuff's happening, or, you're trying to assault a particular new, very heavily fortified location, so there'll be mad, busy, exciting moments, but there's also a lot of quiet downtime that would work really nicely for a live stream. So I think it would be a really perfect live stream candidate. But then the question occurs, how do I fit that into the continuity? Because say, I do the first 5 parts of a series, then I do a live stream, and then I record another typical part. Am I saying that you won't be able to really follow what's happened in part 6 if you haven't watched the live stream? Because lots of people just, either don't want to watch the live streams or don't feel like watching, 4-5 hours of unedited footage or what have you. So, do I take that live stream footage and try and edit it down into part 6 and then it just gets repackaged as part 6? But in which case, it's probably going to be a bit scruffy because, if Claire's ever reading something out, but something really important happens at the same time, then what do I do at that point? Do I just kind of acknowledge at the beginning, this was a live stream, but I've edited it down, so, that might happen? Or, it's just an interesting question. It's an interesting question. There might be an argument for saying, okay, in the live streams, we don't do any main plot stuff. The live streams are just for, exploring and looting and scrapping and doing some, base building and whatever. The live streams could be based more around the camp and workshop shops and all of that sort of business. And then, when we get back to the main series, then we basically, maybe I'd put like a card on screen or a pinned comment saying, hey, just so you know, between the last episode and this one, we did this live stream, and if anything of note happened in that live stream in terms of like, leveling up or whatever, give a quick recap of that, and then people can choose to go and watch the live stream. But if they don't want to, then they can just carry straight on. You can get people caught up in like 10 seconds. I don't know. That's what's really stressing me out at the minute. I'm just not quite sure what the right way to do it is. Like, I've decided I'm not going to do Fallout 76 live streams immediately. I want to get a bit more, to grips with the game first. Like, I think the earliest time I would consider a Fallout 76 live stream would be post-launch, like, say, the weekend of November 17th, 18th. That's like the earliest I'd consider it. That's not like a plan, by the way. That is just the absolute earliest I'd be willing to even think about it post-launch. So maybe that sort of time I might try one, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, a lot of Fallout 76 floating around. And I'm sure a lot of people will ask me how I feel about it down in the actual question. So I guess I'll just skip to that bit now, which is, it's really interesting. I mean, like, for me, the best bit of it is its potential. Because right now, it's still very much forming up. Like, you can see people are running around, they're learning the game. Lots of people, like, you never really see camps dotted around at all. Like, clearly people are just running around, exploring the world, getting themselves set up, trying to find some nice guns and some decent armor, and just kind of, following the main plot, figuring out what's going on, etc, etc, etc. For the time being, there's a bunch of stuff that people aren't really digging into. Like, workshops, people are just running straight past them and not trying to secure them. Camps are not particularly impressive. People are just kind of, slapping down just, one foundation and like a workbench and a stash on it, which in offense was what I was doing on the Xbox. So that's why it was really important to me in the first part of the PC coverage, that like before the end of it, I built like a little actual house that actually had a bit of like, order to it. It wasn't just like, a bit of floor with some stuff on it. Had like, okay, there's the downstairs work area and the upstairs living area. And, I plan to like extend that upwards. I want to make it taller and taller and taller. So like, eventually it does actually become a skyscraper. And at some point, we'll unlock metal walls and brick walls and whatever. So, we'll replace one type of wall with another, and maybe it'll become a 3x3 grid rather than a 2x2 grid. So it'll become a more impressive building. And like, yeah, that's kind of what I want to happen. I want kind of like, progress of the camp to be kind of, representing my own growth. Because that's what's going to be really exciting, I think. Like, in a few months' time, you're going to sign into Fallout 76 and like, you're just going to be in Flatwoods. And you're going to see a massive structure in the distance that's not on the map. Because it's not a location, it's someone's camp. And they're going to have built some really cool stuff. They might have built statues and really tall, interesting, sprawling buildings. And you're just going to see them all over the shop. And I think, like, what people make with those tools when people get really creative, that's just going to be really cool. That's going to be so damn cool. So I'm just really looking forward to what people start making. Obviously, people can't make that much good stuff right now because you need to play the game to unlock plans. It's not like Fallout 4 where as long as you've got the materials, you can build in terms of like, settlement building. You can build pretty much everything straight away with only a tiny number of restrictions. Like, you need science to build really advanced turrets, or you need some charisma perks. Local leader, that was it. Local leader if you want to actually have like shops and stalls inside your settlement. Inside Fallout 76, for the most part, you can build everything you've got the materials, but only if you have the plan. The plan is the limiting factor, and plans get handed out as rewards for quests. You just find them when you're looting. So as time goes by, people will be able to build more and more impressive things. And as they unlock more plans and people level up and, they can have more advanced crafting, they're going to be wanting more and more rare resources. And then, all of a sudden, the small number of workshops that actually have really rare resources are going to become constant war zones, because people are going to be wanting to actually go and either have the actual workshops for themselves or just try and storm them, just literally run up to the actual harvesters, grab the materials, and then run the hell away. And that's going to be really interesting when people start actually trying to, fortify and dig in around really, really high yield, important rare resource workshops. That's going to be when the game really comes alive, I think. So Fallout 76 for me right now is potential. There's so much potential to it, and it's really exciting to watch. Anyway, that's me talking about Fallout 76 quite a lot, and I've probably missed some stuff anyway, but don't worry. I'm sure it's all going to come down in the questions. Speaking of which, let's get to them now. Hey John, I love you and what you do, plus I respect your opinion. Oh, this is a perfect question. Well done. That was the first question that got asked and it began like that. Good work. Now I feel good about myself. How good is Fallout 4 VR, or should I avoid it when I get my Vive? Ooh, really interesting question. Fallout 4 VR is such a mixed bag, which is, there are bits of it that straight up just, I think, don't work very well. Now, I know that's not the universal opinion. You know, what I'm about to give you is fully opinion, matter of preference. Like, you know, I've spoken to Matt from Up Is Not Jump about this, because, you know, he spends a lot of time playing VR next to me. He's done a lot more VR. Like, you know, the Pip-Boy system, where you actually have to, you know, raise your wrist to actually get your Pip-Boy, and it doesn't actually pause the game, and then you have to use your other hand to actually cycle through it. Like, he says once he's got used to that, it's absolutely fine for him. And he has no problem with any of that whatsoever. He thinks that's all absolutely A-okay. I could never get used to that. I found the Pip-Boy really fiddly. You know, graphically there are problems. There's little bits of flickering and whatnot, but I can't really not recommend Fallout 4 VR and Skyrim VR for the Vive. For the very simple reason that, like, they are the biggest, most ambitious games that have been made for VR yet. They're amazing. They're amazing. And I noticed that you said when you get your Vive. So I'm not sure whether you've had much experience with virtual reality yet, or whether your Vive's going to be your first experience of virtual reality. It's really hard to explain. It's really hard to explain VR. It's really hard to show VR on YouTube, which is why I've got such admiration for what the channel Up Is Not Jump does. Because, yeah, it's very difficult to make VR work as a YouTube video, because what is absolutely incredible and awe-inspiring and amazing in VR doesn't always look that good when you actually, you know, take a version of it and make it flat and put it on a little screen that people are watching in 2D. It just doesn't always work, but it is incredible. It is just incredible to be walking through Fallout 4 and Skyrim. And the fact that they are old games that have been kind of repurposed and shoehorned into VR creates good and bad things. Like, particularly Skyrim VR, I think. Because Skyrim is, to my mind, in terms of, like, aesthetics, it's a bit more iconic than Fallout 4. Like, I think, you know, huge numbers of gamers would recognise large parts of Skyrim immediately. Like, you know, you'll put me in any town in Skyrim and I can probably, like, you know, walk around it and show you exactly where everything is. You know, Fallout 4, there might be bits of the map where you could just, like, plonk me down and I wouldn't be quite sure where I was. You could put me in certain bits of maybe, probably in particular, southwest Boston, and I wouldn't be quite 100% how to navigate through them. Like, I think Skyrim is better known and more iconic, and it's just kind of amazing to be playing Skyrim VR and just thinking, I know this. I've played through this on, you know, originally the 360 and then on PC and then, like, the special edition. And, like, for it to be, like, life-size and big and in front of you and you can just, like, turn your head and it's all around you. It's really special. Okay, it's just really special. So I can't not recommend it, though absolutely they have flaws. They are flawed games, you know, particularly in Skyrim, when you get to the system where, you know, the sword fighting doesn't really work properly, because, you know, there's not a proper system of using your shield to block and parry, and, you know, you can't attack someone's arm by stabbing them in the arm with your sword, because, you know, it's the same hitbox system as in the base game, which is a bit disappointing, which is why I personally recommend using magic and bows, because bows work really nicely and magic works really nicely. And then if you need someone to tank for you, potentially going for conjuration, so you've kind of got someone else there, or potentially just always traveling around with Skyrim companions, because then they can handle the melee and you can provide support in the form of healing, offensive magic and archery. I personally say that's the best way to play the game, so you don't have to deal with swords and shields. I think those are the weakest parts of it, which is a real shame. But even with those caveats, I can't not recommend it. It's just such a wonderful experience. It's definitely worth playing. When you were recording Deliver Us the Moon and shouting for Claire, did Claire pop by wondering why you were shouting her name? No, she didn't. No, she didn't. I think Claire's got so used at this point to me just randomly yelling and shouting things when I'm recording that she's just kind of got some good noise-cancelling headphones in, so she just can't hear a thing. It's absolutely fine. What was the highlight of your month outside of video games? Ooh. Okay, well, I'm much whether you count this as like outside of video games, because, it was in West Virginia, which I was only there because of a video game. But I'm going to say the owl, the really, really massive owl, Samson the giant owl who was in the West Virginia vlog. He was such a good owl and he had such massive eyes. That was really cool. That was really, really cool indeed. So, yeah, I'm going to say the Birds of Prey in West Virginia. Also, for horse names, I did ask for your best Red Dead Redemption 2 horse name puns. Leon Trotsky. I approve, yes. What's your biggest regret, if any? Honestly, it's mainly that I just didn't start the YouTube channel, earlier than I did. Because, as time has gone by, YouTube has got, exponentially more crowded and seems to get even more so with every passing day. So if, I'd first actually thought about setting up a YouTube channel the very first time I thought about it, which is probably that would have been about, let me think, maybe a year and a half before I actually did, then, with an extra year and a half of runway and having started a little bit earlier, who knows where I could be right now? I could be in a much better place. But then I'm not in a bad place right now at all. We've got the Patreon. We've just got ourselves, a new Fallout game. And we're a channel that's well known for Fallout. We're doing well at the minute. We're doing really nicely. The channel is growing nicely. The growth in the number of subscribers is looking really, really nice. At the minute, we're getting loads of new people into the community who are interested in Fallout 76 and kind of want to be involved with that. Yeah. We're in a good place right now, so it's not exactly a regret, it's just, we probably could be doing even better. So, if that's your biggest regret, you're probably not doing so bad. John, do you have any intention of revisiting Bomber Crew for a possible live stream after Red Dead Redemption 2 and 76 craziness dies down? Well, don't forget Hitman 2. Hitman 2 craziness needs to die down as well. But the answer is yes, absolutely. Bomber Crew was a really fun live stream last time we did, if I recall correctly. So, yeah, 100% we will be nipping back into that too. What's your favourite Queen song? Oh, that's difficult. That's difficult. If you'd asked me, I'd never have described myself as, a fan of Queen in particular. But then, thinking about it, they have a lot of really, really, really good songs. My favourite probably has to be Don't Stop Me Now. I think Don't Stop Me Now is a brilliant song, so there are some great ones, but that one's probably just at the top of the pile. What fascinates you so much about the Fallout universe and games? Really interesting question. Because, obviously I could mention particular games that particularly appeal to me, but when you're talking about the Fallout universe, I'd say that it's probably that the universe itself is so diverse in genre and aesthetic, which I find very, very interesting because it means you never quite know what you're going to run into next. It's a universe that can always surprise you. So, let's take a couple of other examples, like Skyrim. You play Skyrim, it's a fantasy game. There's gonna be fantasy-ish stuff. If you find something that's maybe, not necessarily got a typical place inside fantasy, like, say, the Dwemer Ruins, then, rather than it being, super awesome space-age technology, it's steampunky. So, that can kind of sit alongside fantasy. That's fine. It doesn't really try and surprise you in terms of genre or aesthetics. And Mass Effect, which I absolutely love, is very consistently a sci-fi game. Absolutely, it's a sci-fi game. Hard sci-fi in Mass Effect 1, going a bit softer sci-fi as time goes by, sometimes kind of veering a little bit into space opera kind of territory, but it's sci-fi stuff. Absolutely consistent, fairly unsurprising. What you'll find will fit inside that genre without kind of shocking you too much. But Fallout's interesting, because it's got layers on layers on layers, and there's lots of different stuff it can be, depending on what period you're looking at, what period you're looking back to in particular. And this is actually one of the reasons I think 76 is going to be a really interesting contribution to the franchise and universe. Because, in Fallout, obviously, you've got this, what's kind of viewed as a almost sort of semi-utopian retro-futurism. If you look at the old broadcasts from the old world and the posters and whatever, you would think that the America that was pre-war was this wonderful utopian society where, people had loads of leisure time because robots did all of this work. But then, of course, you dig through it and you can find there's all these terrible stories from beyond the war that the US government that existed before the war in the Fallout universe did all sorts of terrible things. Like, say, one that just happens to occur to me is if you consider, say, the DLC of New Vegas, there was the internment of a large number of people who were ethnically Chinese by the US government, and they were shipped to prison camps inside Big Mountain, and they suffered horrendous medical experiments and all of that business. So, you've got this kind of pre-war nightmarish dystopia going on against the background of this super high-tech, supposedly utopian retrofuturism, and you've got all the Americana and patriotism and the 50s culture. It's a very repressed, traditional 1950s nuclear family style culture, and that's sort of interesting to mix in too. And then you've got the actual nukes themselves, and then you've got the period straight after the nukes where you get all sorts of honestly, at that point I'd say the story veers into horror. Like Fallout 3's Keller family transcripts. At that point, you are dealing with absolute horror. It's nightmarish stuff. So you get into kind of, the straight, immediate post-apocalypse stuff. And now we've got kind of in Fallout 76, we've actually got, I think, well, not really our first look, but our first really in-depth focused look on what happened straight after the bombs fell in areas that weren't just completely incinerated. So you've got areas like Morgantown where we know there was actually a sizable population still living there, and dissent was very brutally repressed, and we know for a fact the police started firing on unarmed protesters on a not irregular basis, and some politicians were absolutely 100% fine with that because, from some people's point of view, it didn't matter what happened anymore. As long as West Virginia kept working and as long as its factories kept pumping out raw resources so people could start rebuilding, everything was acceptable at that point. And, we've got these nightmare stories of people struggling to cope, raiders starting to actually form for the first time, and some real horror stories from people who managed to escape from those guys and tried to recover as best they could, like the story of Tabitha that you've got in Flatwoods, which is, I think one of the first times we've ever seen a really sympathetic view as to what makes a raider and could they be rehabilitated over time, potentially, which is a really interesting take that for the most part Fallout has never really looked at before. So, that's really cool as well. And then obviously as we move forward into some of the other Fallout games that are set much further in the future, we get to questions of what sort of society do we rebuild? If we had a blank slate, what sort of societies could we build? Which ones would work? Which ones wouldn't work? Which ones does the player agree or disagree with? And, that comes up right from the beginning. In Fallout 1, there's questions of Junktown. What sort of town should it be? What sort of town could work the best in the post-apocalypse? What's best for the future of humanity? And all of a sudden you get into a more optimistic tone potentially as we go forward into New Vegas. Well, we're not really asking the question, can humanity rebuild anymore, or are we doomed to repeat our mistakes? But more, okay, we totally can rebuild. We've got this new society. What direction should we take it in? What is the optimal way to rebuild society? It's much more optimistic tone. So Fallout for me as a universe is all about so many different genres living side by side. There's elements of sci-fi, there's elements of horror and survival horror and psychological horror, there's elements of a very nihilistic, lonely, survival-y thing going on, there's this retro-futurism, there's politics going on in the background, there's all sorts of, dark stories of what corporations and politicians got up to immediately before and immediately after the war. It's just that there's so many different stories from so many different time periods when humanity and the universe were in so many different places. There's basically no end to the stories you can tell in the Fallout universe, and I think 76 is a really good demonstration of that. And that kind of makes me excited for the future of the Fallout franchise even more than I already was. Even if you personally decide not to opt into 76 and decide to skip it because, it's a side game in the franchise and it's multiplayer only, it doesn't really have the same element of character building and RPG and story and growth as you might kind of, have liked in previous games. It's a really, really interesting example of something different, a different kind of story that Fallout can tell. And I do think it genuinely has some really interesting storytelling in the form of, its notes and its holotapes, which to my mind has always been Fallout storytelling at its strongest anyway. When you go into an old ruin and you find through terminals and notes and, carefully placed skeletons and loot and whatever, you discover a story of something horrific that happened centuries ago and trying to get to the bottom of a murder mystery of a bunch of skeletons and a few props and a few notes. I think that's really cool. I personally think that's a really fun thing to do. It's always been one of my favourite things to do in the Fallout games, and 76 is full of that sort of thing. But its focus on the period immediately post-war, which we don't normally talk about, which is, very tonally and atmospherically different to what we've seen before, that's kind of representative to me of what I love about the Fallout universe. There's just no end to the amount of stuff you can put into it. And when you've got something as wacky and sci-fi-ish as Old World Blues just happily sitting in canon alongside the survival horror of Dead Money and the nightmarish rural Point Lookout and all of that business, the fact that all of those can exist in the same universe, yeah, that variety, that sort of variety is what really keeps me excited about the universe. Best film of the Cornetto trilogy. Okay, that one's easy. It's Hot Fuzz. Okay? Shaun of the Dead and World's End are both fine, but Hot Fuzz is basically a perfect film. Like, I'm always amazed by it. Like, whenever it's on TV, I'll always rewatch it. Because no matter how many times I rewatch it, I just appreciate it for how ludicrously perfectly it all fits together. Like, I don't think there's a single line in the first half of the film that doesn't lead to something in the second half. Everything is either a pitch-perfect joke or is perfectly setting up something in the second half. As, you know, a ridiculous village comedy, it's amazing and simultaneously a perfect setup for one of my favourite extended multi-stage action sequences in any film. Like, I just think it's got perfect action, perfect comedy. It's pretty much a perfect film. Alright, Hot Fuzz is just a perfect film. John, now RimWorld is finally finished, are you planning to give it another look? Yes. In fact, it's already in the calendar. I don't know exactly when, because a whole bunch of, like, stuff I've already made is just constantly getting shunted out, because, you know, there's Red Dead Redemption 2 and Fallout 76, and there'll be, like, special 76-related one-offs and little guides I do ahead of the actual main launch, and Hitman 2 is going to come at some point. I don't know exactly when I'm going to be able to get my hands on that. It sounds like I'm going to get it a little bit early, with some form of embargo in place. I don't know exactly just yet, but yes, RimWorld absolutely going to give that another look. John, how are you going to survive November with all the releases? By sleeping less than I probably ought to, is pretty much the answer. Flip Pierre, Doctor Who, guest appearance when? This, by the way, is, Dan of NerdCube's little kind of Doctor Who podcast. I don't know. I'm not sure I should be a guest on that, because Dan seems to be really enjoying this season. I'm not so into it, to be honest. I think Jodie herself's doing a good job with what she's got. I just think what she's got to work with isn't spectacular, because all 4 episodes so far have been written by Chris Chibnall, who, you know, my concern with him was always, I kind of looked over what he'd written in the past, and he's never actually written a good episode of Doctor Who. Like, he's never written one I actually think is one of the good episodes. He's just written a bunch of okay episodes, and I feel like what he's written so far for Jodie's run are all okay, apart from Arachnids in the UK, which I just think was genuinely a pretty poor episode, all things considered. Other than that, they've just been fine. They've been alright. I've enjoyed the new team, for the most part. Like, I think Graham's pretty fun. I think Graham's actually nice because, you know, he actually feels like an actual real human being who responds to things in an intelligent fashion. Everyone else kind of is a little bit Doctor Who-y, where, you know, there's a gunshot and everyone runs straight towards it. No, why would you do that? Why would you be doing that? The human thing to do when there's like a massive explosion and gunshots and screaming in the distance is to, you know, nervously try and figure out what's going on, probably run away to a safe distance, maybe call the police. And these are the sorts of reactions that Graham has. I liked him from the very first time in the train when, like, you know, there's lightning and tentacles waving all over the place, and his first reaction is, okay, everybody, get to the back of the carriage, let's get as far away from that thing as possible. And no one else thought to do that. So I just like Graham because he seems to actually like react like a normal human would to the things that he's being exposed to. And, you know, I like the fact that his motivation for coming in the TARDIS is he's really struggling being at home right now because, you know, home is full of too many memories of his deceased partner. So rather than just kind of being alone and having to, you know, quietly deal with his grief in a big empty house that's got all those memories in it, he wants to get out there and keep himself busy. And rather than, like, you know, taking up a new hobby or going on an extended holiday, he's decided to travel in time with the Doctor, which is fine. I like that as a motivation. That's interesting. So we don't really see that. Normally companions just sort of hop in the TARDIS because they've been so charmed by the Doctor, which is, you know, fine on occasion. Like, you know, I like the arc they took Martha on back in the day, for example, and Rose, I think, worked pretty well. But, like, you know, in some ways, Clara and Amy, as much as I enjoyed Amy and didn't enjoy Clara in the slightest, like, I never really quite understood why they travelled with the Doctor for the most part. Like, Amy and Rory continued to habitually travel with the Doctor whenever he happened to show up, even after, like, Rory had died multiple times. Like, it never actually struck them after, like, I don't know, say the second or third time that Rory had died. Maybe we should stop doing this at this point. Maybe the next time he shows up, we say, you know what? I'm sorry, but my husband has died several times already, and sure, it's worked out so far, but we really can't assume that's going to keep happening. So, yeah, I'm kind of glad that, like, Graham has a really quite interesting reason that he wanted to join the team. So, you know, I'm not going to stop watching it. I'm going to kind of, you know, see it through. And I'm hoping the other guest writers will do a better job. And I think Jodie herself has been doing fine. I just think she's not got the strongest scripts to work with, which is a shame. Because the stuff I really liked in her first episode, like, I really like the fact that, say, she had to build the sonic screwdriver, like, it didn't just get given to her. Because previously, the screwdriver's just sort of been there, like, the Ninth Doctor just had it. And I think, the 10th Doctor just inherited the same Sonic. I don't think it was a different one in the slightest. Then Matt Smith, like, when he went into his new TARDIS, it was just sort of produced for him out of the actual console. And I can't remember about Peter Capaldi, but that's probably because I'm trying to block most of those episodes from my memory because they're all kind of terrible. So I'm not actually sure. So I kind of like, you know, she had to actually make her own Sonic. I like the fact that, you know, the core Doctor Who stuff, like the TARDIS and the Sonic, they weren't just, like, you know, gifted to her at the end of the first episode. Just, oh yeah, I've got this new TARDIS. Oh, the interior is different now. Oh, and it's produced a sonic screwdriver. Great, now I've got the Doctor stuff, I can get on with doctoring. No, it's like, okay, the TARDIS has actively gone missing, and I need to actually build a specialised machine to go and find it. And I don't have my Sonic, so I need to actually build a new Sonic from scratch. I like the ideas behind that. There's lots of good ideas going on. I like the idea of it being a new team dynamic to the companions rather than just being one person who's blatantly sort of in love with the Doctor in some capacity or another. I like this idea of actually, you know, having to earn or build or go out and find the doctory stuff rather than just being gifted. There's ideas I like. I'm just not 100% keen on the execution. So, as Dan's really into this series, and I'd probably be a bit of a downer on that podcast, I probably shouldn't get involved. I want to know how the weather and possible sleet, snow, darkness, etc. has affected the work schedule and life schedule. Some folks have mood changes due to weather. Really interesting question, actually, because some of my family members are actually slightly photosensitive. They do actually kind of, you know, they suffer in terms of mood during the winter. So they've all got, like, these special, like, sun lamp things. So they can have, like, these really bright, like, summer-style light on them during the winter. Personally, that's never actually affected me much. The thing is, like, because I work from home and I work online, things like how dark it is outside for the most part don't really affect me. Because I work really weird hours anyway, not just like right now where it's really weird, where I'm just working until 5 a.m. on occasion. But, yeah, like, it's not unusual for me to start working, say, in the late morning and then just work through to late evening, UK time. But I know what you mean, because when I used to do, like, more traditional office work, like, you know, it's certainly a lot more pleasant in the summer where you can, like, leave work and you've still got light, and when you get home, it's still light and you just feel like, oh, there's still a fair bit to the day. But, like, if it's already, like, pitch black and gloomy and cold and wet before you've even left the office, you know, you've still got, like, half an hour's work to do and you're not even ready to go yet. Yeah. I understand, like, you know, how that can affect mood. But for me, working from home and working online and working at weird hours anyway, it doesn't really affect me. So I suppose I'm lucky in that regard. Will you be upgrading your graphics card to the new RTX 2080 Titan? No, I feel like that would be overkill for the time being. Right now I'm still on, like, the 1080 series, and honestly, that does for the time being. Like, okay, fine, I probably couldn't, like, run games beautifully at high frame rates if I wanted 4K, but I never really bother with 4K. Like, as long as I can run games at 1080p and a high frame rate, I'm pretty happy with that for the time being. Like, in many ways, like, the most important component for me is the CPU, because obviously this computer doesn't just play games, it also has to render. And, like, how good your CPU is almost always going to be the limiting factor for how fast you can actually render something. So I've actually got one of, like, the mid-range i9s, which is ridiculously overkill. Like, you do not need an i9 under any circumstances for gaming, but that extra CPU power for rendering is very, very useful indeed. I don't see a need to do an update to any of the 20 series anytime soon. I will look into it at some point, but at the bare minimum, I'll wait for prices to come down a little bit. I'm not in a rush to upgrade anyway. What's happening to your Cornwall Crusader Kings 2 series when Holy Fury drops? Interesting question. So, what I'm thinking of doing with that is, as I'm, like, you know, I'm an emperor and I'm independent and In fact, I've barely had a liege for, like, this entire run-through. Like, you know, we had Norway a bit. I think, like, we got independence from them in, like, part 3 or 4, and then we were an independent duchy and became an independent kingdom, and then we started eating some other kingdoms and became an empire. Like, we've barely had to do any liege-style politics, to be honest, this whole time. Like, the vast majority of it, we've been independent, and the times we did have a liege was when I was still learning the game, so I didn't really know how best to manage it. Like, lieges just, you know, struck me as a thing to be very suspicious of, to break free from as quickly as possible, because I wasn't quite sure how to keep them happy or what to do, and whether, like, at any moment they might just, like, you know, take my land off me and just, like, you know, screw everything up. So I just wanted to be independent. But I'd quite like to do a Crusader Kings 2 series that's a lot more political. So what I'm really thinking of doing is, like, if there's, like, a good point to stop. Of course, Crusader Kings 2 doesn't actually have, like, an end. There's no, like, Stellaris-style endgame crisis. Technically, if you've got, like, whatever it's called, Sunset Invasion, there's, like, the Aztecs, but I think they'd have already showed up by now, and I suppose it's, like, the hordes coming from the east as well. There's still a bit more of that to come. But again, I'm mostly an island nation that's, like, on the far west of the map, so that's unlikely to trouble me if I'm lucky. There's, you know, a lot in the way before they get to me. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what the logical endpoint's going to be. I'll know it when I see it. I will pick a good endpoint when I feel like the story of Cornwall has reached the point where the only thing to do at that point is just, like, slowly use my dominant military to paint the rest of the map my colours, and it's just a case of just waiting for the right casus belli to actually just, like, you know, go around smashing everyone. At that point, I don't think it'll be particularly interesting anymore. So, yeah, I'll find the right point to end it. Then I'll probably go over to, I'm thinking, like, a really small count in the Byzantine Empire, where my intention is never going to be to, like, break away. My intention is going to be, like, to politic my way to becoming the emperor. Because there's going to be changes to the Byzantine Empire in Holy Fury, which is, the Empire can't actually change the rules of its succession. It's got its own unique Byzantine exclusive flavoured form of, like, elective monarchy, where people who are closely related to the Emperor are eligible, together with anyone who's got a claim, and I think it's the Marshal and possibly the Chancellor. So, like, you know, what you'd want to do is, it's any commanders at all, to, like, represent the fact that, yeah, the military had a very big role in deciding who was going to be the Emperor in the actual historical Byzantine Empire. So, you know, you'd want to get yourself promoted to being, like, a commander or marshal, ideally, because, yeah, commanders, while they would be the easiest thing to become, they also have to, like, you know, go and fight battles and potentially get themselves killed. So, yeah, having the person who's actually your main faction leader being actually, you know, a commander for the Byzantines, probably a bad idea, risky. Marshal would be ideal, and then you'd get to vote on the next leader, and you could start trying to curry favour, and you'd be politicking your way up, actually trying to seize the imperial throne, while simultaneously trying to build your own holding up as well. So that would just be really, really fun. And of course, by the time you're actually head of the Byzantines, there's a very, very good chance that they're going to be in trouble from, you know, Catholicism on one side, or the various kind of Islamic factions on the other side. So, you know, probably you're not going to be in a good shape. You're going to actually have to, like, you know, fight back and try and secure the empire. And then, of course, you've got the fun stuff with restoring Rome. You could try and do that. And, you know, obviously there's the new Hellenistic religions as well. So, you know, secretly converting to a Hellenistic religion, going down that route and trying to create an actual proper old Hellenistic Byzantine empire, and then make that the religion of Rome and stuff. That just sounds fun. That sounds really, really fun to me, because it's got, like, you know, a really logical end point, which is reforming Rome. And on the way to reforming Rome, you're much more likely to actually run into the Mongols and whatever yourself, because, you know, you're much closer to where they're going to be starting. So I think that could be really, really interesting. So that's the vague plan I've got at the minute. It's to kind of wrap up Cornwall, maybe have, like, you know, a couple of weeks grace period, and then dive into Holy Fury with a Byzantine run. That's the plan anyway. That might be subject to change. They haven't announced quite everything that's in Holy Fury yet. They're still announcing a few last bits and pieces. They only just announced the Byzantine thing very recently. So, you know, there might be a last minute announcement of something else new that's going to be amazing, but that's the plan. John, why are people having a massively difficult time restraining themselves from being such insufferable arsers concerning Fallout 76? It's really interesting, isn't it? No one hates Fallout more than the Fallout fandom, but then it's kind of baked in to the community at this point, and it is an unpleasant part of the Fallout fandom that there is, very much the idea that Fallout 3 is total garbage, even though, you know what, even if it hasn't necessarily aged the best, and even if you don't agree with some of the decisions versus old Fallout and you don't think it's RPG enough or whatever, it's still a really, really good technical achievement of its time. It's still really lonely and atmospheric. It still creates and evokes the right emotion to this day. It's still an interesting, well put together game with some amazing quests. Like Tranquility Lane is still a fantastic quest. One of my favourite quests in all of Fallout, full stop. Which is just, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And then there's Fallout 4, which of course is also trash. And then, Fallout 4 coming out made people better inclined towards Fallout 3. Quite frankly, and then everyone said, oh, Fallout 4's total trash because, the new speech system and voice protagonist and diddly-diddly-dee, and that was wonderful in its own way too. It was Fallout, and it still had the wonderful loneliness, but had much more variety in its map, and had that really big, interesting vertical Boston where you could climb your way up, and all of the ruins you had to pick your way through, and you could probably get lost, and there were no load zones. So the city of Boston was a lot more interesting than the city of Washington, D.C., and there were all these interesting, cool little things to find, and the shooting actually worked, and the crafting system was just, to my mind, a huge step forward. The Junker crafting system in Fallout 4 was incredible. Absolutely loved that cycle of going out, looting, bringing it back, actually kind of, using it to form new guns. The shooting mechanics were much improved, arguably too improved. They were now so nice that, lots of people started playing it as a straight-up shooter, and thus large parts of the really nice RPG-ish, buildy, vapsy stuff that was in Fallout 4, people neglected a little bit, and they assumed it wasn't there. Anyway, I'll save that for another day, because I've got most of the script written for Fallout 4 is better than you think. Oh, that's going to be controversial when it happens, but I do. But, and now 76 is here, and everyone's up in arms, even though, it's an interesting one. And I think people are up in arms because they see it as not a proper Fallout game, which is not supposed to be. It's blatantly supposed to be a side game and a spin-off. But, I think the way people are acting, it's like they're getting this instead of a proper Fallout game. Because they've got this, they've not got Fallout 5 or whatever. And that's not how it works, to be honest. It's blatantly obvious that Bethesda's main team and top talent right now are probably going to be working, the guys who've got the experience making the single-player RPGs, they're working on the next Elder Scrolls. They're working on Elder Scrolls 6, whatever that is. This is a side project. This is, a little sub-game in the Fallout franchise that's going to have a smaller team working on it. It's, an experiment, and I think it's a really interesting, cool experiment that's got a lot of stuff in it for single players, a lot of interesting stories and whatnot, and as I've said many times before, I will gladly take a Fallout franchise that does things differently every single game, that mixes things up in terms of genre and tone and atmosphere and aesthetics, which Fallout consistently does, and I would always rather have that than a franchise where we just get the same thing stamped out every 2 years or so. I would never change it from what it is right now. I'm really glad that Bethesda are happy to take risks. So, you know what? Some people are going to opt out of this, 100%. I don't know quite why people seem so keen to actually, jump down in the comments. And I see it a lot. 2 minutes after I've published a video on 76, somebody down in the comments saying, oh, this looks like trash. And because it's 2 minutes after the video went live, I know they haven't watched the video. They just basically clicked on the video exclusively so they could say, this looks like trash, I'm not going to opt into this. I never really engaged with those people because I don't know what they want me to say. Do they want me to beg them to come back or debate them and try and convince them that no, Fallout 76 is great? I mean, if I've just put an hour-long video up talking about it and they can't be bothered to watch that, then, they're not exactly debating in good faith if I were to engage with them, so I don't bother with that sort of person. So, I mean, if you don't think 76 is for you, fair enough. It's absolutely not going to be for everybody. I think there's interesting stuff there. Whether you're kind of into the multiplayer or even if you're not, I think it's interesting. But I'm not saying it's objectively good. Nothing's objectively good. Everything in entertainment is fundamentally subjective. It personally appeals to me, even as someone who has always seen the Fallout franchise as a single-player, character-y, plotty, story type thing, because there is still a lot of that stuff there, and I think just Flatwoods and everything there is so interesting. In fact, once I've had a chance to actually explore the area around a bit more in detail, I might actually bring back, remember the old Hitman videos, the full stories, where I kind of went through the Hitman levels and tried to piece together every story and figure out what was actually going on, like in total, because Hitman's full of these little background stories. I kind of want to do some of them for Fallout 76, perhaps. And I might just start off with one with Flatwoods, where I just kind of go over all the tapes and all the notes and all the lore and all the skeletons and all the corpses and try and figure out the actual full story of what happened to that town and all the people listed on the terminal. Where are they now? Because by the time you've seen this, part 2 of the PC series will be out, and I already found one of the corpses way down south. So I found a guy who was trying to hand out flyers to actually get people to come to Flatwoods, but he was killed by Scorched on the road. So one of the people who we didn't know what happened to, we've actually found him. So those other corpses are going to be around somewhere as well, and I'm suspecting Colonel's dad, his corpse is going to be somewhere as well, and there's probably going to be a tragic note on that too. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I'll think about that. Hello Tabby, Claire and John, I'm slowly but surely making my way through the Crusader Kings 2 videos, and I was wondering how long it takes you to make just one of them. Interesting question. So I think normally it's about probably 2.5, 3 hours of raw footage edited down to hour and a half, hour and a quarter, thereabouts. So there's a lot of me just kind of looking at things, trying to figure things out, just kind of, going through the character screens, going through the character menu, moving forward time and waiting for the next thing to actually pop up. So a lot gets cut out. There's a lot of quiet downtime that gets cut out where I'm just not talking. So that's just silence that gets cut out there. So yeah, probably between 2 and 3 hours of raw footage per episode that Claire, of course, then actually edits together. So the amount of actual man hours that goes into it is quite significant, yes. Will you cook some stuff from the Fallout cookbook when the next anniversary rolls around? I have been thinking about it. I can't deny. I will say the cookbook does seem to have, for the most part, it's fairly kind of normal stuff. There's nothing desperately exciting in it. It's fairly just normal meals, just, with slightly Fallout-y names attached. But, the actual meals there are not the most desperately exciting, sexy things in the world. It's mostly just fairly common stuff. So I'll have a think about what the best way to do that would be, but I'm certainly considering it. And any sneak peeks into upcoming co-ops around Fallout 76? Okay, fine. Obviously, I've been chatting to Nerdcubed, and I've been chatting to Up Is Not Jump. I don't know exactly when for either of them, but those are the people who are likely to show up first. Will there be a community play day of Fallout 76 as soon as there are private servers? Yes, because I want to have the Great John Hunt, where basically everybody starts, around the edge of an area. For example, you're allowed to stand just outside the forest, and I start in the middle of the forest, and then I kill someone, so I pick up the bounty, so I'm always permanently visible on everybody's map as a red murderer target, and then everybody comes and hunts me. So, everyone's closing in on me, the net's closing in. I have to try and find a way to escape and slip through the net, or find a good place to hide or hold out, actually, within the forest. Then I have to just try and, get past you all and then go on the run and everyone's trying to follow me. And the rules will be no fast travelling. Everyone just has to travel on foot. So there's totally going to be, a few rounds of the Great John Hunt, which I think would be very fun. And maybe if I can find, someone else to actually do that with me, someone else can also be the person we're chasing down. So, as a result of that, I could also take part in the hunt as one of the hunters, which would be fun as well. So, yeah, that's definitely something to have a think about. From what you've seen so far of Fallout 76 and its online playstyle, do you think this is the direction Bethesda are going with the next big Fallout release and into the future with massive online multiplayer things? I honestly don't think so. I think this is them testing the water for whether they want to actually, create more side games like that. Because, of course, this is not the first. We had Elder Scrolls Online already, which has been, well, I'm told actually it's quite successful. The people who have been playing that play it consistently and they actually have a perfectly decent time with it. But it was never, the biggest deal, to be honest. Fallout 76 feels a lot bigger than Elder Scrolls Online did. Certainly there's been a lot more hype around launch, which is very, very interesting indeed. So, I don't know what that really means, whether that means, we're more likely to get a spin-off of Dishonored or something like that, where, there's teams of assassins doing competitive assassinating versus a different team of assassins. Okay, I just made that up, but now I've said it out loud, it sounds amazing. I really want that to exist, actually, yes. But no, Bethesda have always closely tied their identity to big single-player RPGs. They're working on a big sci-fi single-player thing right now. They've just done the Prey business, and that was a big single-player action RPG thing. that's just kind of built into Bethesda's DNA. Like, I have no doubt whatsoever Fallout 5 will be back to something that's much more traditional Fallout, but this will be them testing the water to see whether they want to create more online spin-offs, whether it's a good thing, whether it's well received, whether people choose to play it, whether they've actually got a decent lifespan on them, whether it makes sense for them to actually develop them in terms of, like, you know, are they getting a decent return on it? So, yeah. I suspect they're just testing the water for more spin-offs rather than changing the direction of their core franchises. And have either you or Claire read the new Simon Stannenhag book, The Electric State, yet? I have not, but I don't know about Claire. Hang on, I'll pass over to Claire to see what she knows about this.
I hadn't heard about that author or that book either, but I did look up The Electric State, the book you mentioned, and it looks like an illustrated novel in some kind of post-apocalyptic world. And I have to say the illustrations look gorgeous from what I've been able to see, so I'll definitely keep an eye out for it next time I'm in a bookstore or library, see if I can find it, because yeah, it does look really, really pretty.
With all the talk of apocalyptic horses in Undead Nightmare, I was wondering if you or Claire had read Good Omens. Yes, I'm pretty sure we've both read Good Omens. I definitely have. Not for a while, I read it ages back. I'm pretty sure Claire has as well. If so, how do you feel about the casting of Michael Sheen and David Tennant as Aziraphale and Crowley? Honestly, I'm pretty okay with David Tennant as Crowley. That's interesting. I'm not so 100% sold on Michael Sheen. That's going to be... I'll need to see it before I can make a decision about that. Like, I always found it was an odd one. I think anything Terry Pratchett writes is really hard to actually adapt for screen, because, like, there's like those notes at the end of the Pratchett books where you could buy the old figurines, which specifically say, you know, these aren't perfect because they could never be, but they're less wrong than other people would be had they attempted to do the same. So I think, like, even Terry Pratchett was very clear that, like, the weird and wonderful worlds that he imagined were very, very hard to visualize. So yeah, I mean, actually, in all fairness, the what was it? There was the Hogfather adaptation that Sky did. What was that? That must have been like 10 years ago now. That was pretty good. I enjoyed that. I thought that was decent. So yeah, I'll definitely be watching it with great interest. So we'll see. I'm not 100% on the casting, but it's hard to say having only just seen one trailer. Do you think in Fallout 76 there'll be groups of people collaborating to build a town? I really hope so, though, because actually even team members, I think, aren't allowed to put their camps next to each other and can't really share a settlement. It's one person's settlement that other people can choose to contribute to, and thus I think aren't actually allowed to build. I'll need to look into that, actually. I may be wrong on that, but I think only the one person whose camp it is allowed to actually do the building in that camp. The others have to just provide resources. But don't quote me on that, I'll need to check it. But I think that's actually not true in workshops, where a team that holds a workshop, everyone is allowed to build and repair in that. But I'll need to dig into that, because most of my testing so far has been solo. The only team stuff I've done was the very first West Virginia, where we were all running all over the shop, so we didn't have time to do a lot of very careful, granular testing as to what team members can and can't do. How would you feel about a YouTube Premium, where YouTube gets a high percentage of your ad revenue in exchange for priority in the algorithms and looser restrictions on their content policy in terms of copyright strikes, automatic demonetization? Oh, no, definitely not. Because YouTubers would end up in an arms race, because, yeah, the people who were willing to accept it would gain so much as a result, everyone else would have to do it. So basically, everyone would end up having no choice but to actually do it to avoid getting left behind. And as a result of that, basically YouTube would just get more money. And also, like, I don't think they can do much in terms of some parts of copyright and demonetization. Like, sure, they've got some leeway in how they choose to execute on that. But, you know, they aren't trying to comply with laws that they themselves did not make. They're just laws that are out there. So I'm not sure it's workable, and I think it would not be desirable were it to happen. So, yeah. We'll see. I mean, what I think YouTube could do, and would be right to do, would be they could have a whitelist system where if channels have consistently, like, you know, say, had content ID matches, but, like, they've been repeatedly actually, like, not upheld on appeal, so YouTube's constantly said, okay, actually that was fair use after all. After a certain period of time, a channel should be whitelisted. and as a result of being whitelisted, they can't actually just suffer like advertising unfriendly. Like if someone wants to actually flag that as advertising unfriendly, it can only be done manually on YouTube's end because the channel has previously shown itself to be reliable, and a channel that's repeatedly shown itself to be reliable and obeyed the rules and not caused trouble and not been involved in strikes or whatever ought to maybe logically get a slight boost in the rankings. But then that's a bit risky because, yeah, I'm not sure it's a good idea. I mean, for as much as we complain in terms of like the technical side when YouTube messes up and changes everything, I think in terms of their algorithm for rankings, that's not bad. I think for the most part, that does a decent enough job. How do you think Fallout 76 will serve as a source of many a Truna challenge runs? Interesting. I think it'll be more about collabs and kind of doing some fun, interesting collaborative work, like, you know, building things together, going on expeditions together, going on cryptid hunts together. I think it will actually be much more about, yeah, being able to bring a lot of people into the channel that haven't been here before. Like, you know, there are a lot of well-known for Fallout YouTubers out there, and this is a good chance for us to, you know, work together and collaborate and do some really cool stuff. But I think it'll be less about necessarily challenge runs and more about, yeah, actually just kind of doing some really interesting collaborative projects, actually. Like, you know, building something cool together. You still haven't updated the front page? I haven't, you know, sorry, I've been so busy this month. I'll do it in December when it's quieter, I promise. And your question, how is the hole in one of your rooms? Yes, we've got ourselves a hole in our bathroom still, because we had to tear out one of our walls to access a damaged waste pipe. And it's proven to be a nightmare to get sorted out and repaired and fixed up. I think now we're into the final straight though. The repairs have actually been done. Now we just need to actually get a tiler in to actually repair our bathroom, which still has a massive hole in the wall. The Great Hole Saga has been... it has been annoying. Let us just say that. What was said during the Greenbrier event by Pete Hines? Ah, yes, I did tease this. I wasn't allowed to say at the time, but honestly, it wasn't anything desperately exciting because we hadn't actually played the game yet. Pete was talking about a few things pertaining to, like, you know, the lore and whatever. He did say it's like an interesting note, actually, that they had originally once upon a time intended to do the launch event for Fallout 3 in the Greenbrier, purely because even though the game Fallout 3 wasn't set in West Virginia and Greenbriers was the original bunker that, like, you know, senior politicians were going to be taken to keep them safe. So, yeah, it might have been a fun place for the launch event anyway. But they didn't do that, and they were really glad they didn't do that, because, of course, that meant that it was available for the West Virginia Fallout game, which is really cool. Other than that, a few things he said were just like, you know, he was flagging a few things that we weren't allowed to actually record, and we weren't allowed to show. And that was purely because the version we played was earlier than the beta, so there was still some unfinished assets floating around, like the actual, like, you know, the main launch screen where you pick, like, you know, play, photo mode, settings or whatever. That was still like a work in progress thing, so that was looking like scruffy, and like there was some bits on there that like shouldn't have been there or whatever. So, like, you know, one of the rules is we weren't allowed to show the original, like, front page and what have you. But for the most part, yeah, it was just some little fun tidbits like that thing about the Greenbriers and Fallout 3 and how he was glad it had actually worked out the way it worked out. And then actually I got to actually sit down and just have like a chat with him in the party afterwards and like the following day at dinner. And he's a lovely man, really genuinely lovely. Like, you know, he went around the room, he tried to meet everyone. I played table tennis with the head of PR for Bethesda, which was cool. So yeah, it was just like, yeah, the Bethesda team were actually very, very, very nice and very welcoming, which was lovely of them. Earlier this year, Monster Hunter World and Final Fantasy XIV had a crossover event in which mechanical elements of each series were incorporated into the other, meaning Monster Hunter began to feel like Final Fantasy and vice versa. If you could put two game series in a similar crossover, what would they be, and how would you cross them over in a mechanical sense? Ooh, now that is an interesting question. You know, just because they're aesthetically quite similar, I think it would be an interesting thing to blend together. I'd quite like to see Batman Arkham games and Dishonored kind of blurred together into one big thing where, yeah, you actually have, you know, some of the more fantastical magical elements of Dishonored, and you've got more of the sneaking behind people and knife in the back and bows and arrows if you want to go down a more violent route, but you've also got the Batman swinging around the rafters, sneaking around, smoke pellets, all of that business. Yeah, I just think that would be a fun combination, especially if you got to kind of like, choose between the two different directions, where you start off as a character who's got basically no abilities, and then you actually start like choosing which way to go. Do you go down more of a Batman-y, gadgety sort of route, or do you go down more of a Dishonored-y kind of magical sort of route? That'd be fun, yes. Hi John, hope your evening's great. What video game would you make given unlimited time, talent, and money? I'd probably still make just a post-apocalyptic dating simulator, but I'd make it really, really in-depth. Like, there would be branching paths going off all over the place. It would basically just be like a massive choose-your-own-adventure novel that could just like fractal off into literally thousands of endings. But it would all be post-apocalypse, and it would still be a dating game. Okay, that's what I want, basically, yes. And how would you market this game to YouTubers like yourself? So, it's post-apocalypsy, but it's also romancy. Is there going to be some form of weird mutant hardcore sex scene? I don't know. You'll have to check every single ending to find out. And there probably would be, actually. Yes, there probably would be some form of horrific mutant sex scene somewhere buried away in one of the endings. So, that's how I'd sell that right there. John, give us a top 5 ranking of your favourite shotguns in games. Oh, that's hard. I'm not sure I can come up with a definitive ranking. Some that really stand out to me, just that I, remember, and thus, they must be pretty damn good. I will always remember fondly the one in 13. Do you remember 13? It was like that cel-shaded shooter from the PS2 and GameCube era. But like, it felt really nice and meaty. But the important thing was, because it was like in the comic book style, when you blasted someone with it and they were blasted back, you got like little comic frames popping up of them being smashed back into a wall or whatever. So it made it feel like it hit even flipping harder. And the one in the most recent Doom was very good as well. Those were 2 excellent recent shotguns. And I do recall the one in Binary Domain being very, very nice too. And more horse name suggestions, Hermione. Okay, I approve, that's pretty good. Livestream idea, Fallout 4 co-op. John plays the game but can't use the Pip-Boy at all. Claire uses the Pip-Boy app to change weapons, heal, fast travel, etc. Interesting idea. Maybe we'd have to have some form of rule that I'm not allowed to give Claire suggestions. She has to make her own decisions on that. Whether that would work or not, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about how that would fit together. Plus, that would mean Claire couldn't be in the chat. She couldn't be in the super chat. She couldn't be engaging with all of you lot. So, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure about that. Possibly, a slightly refined version of that idea would be if Claire was doing her normal business, I was doing the Fallout 4, and someone else who had no access to the stream whatsoever, who was actively trying to hinder me, had access to the Pip-Boy. So we just like gave it to Matt or something, and he was just basically trying to screw me over. Like, he wasn't allowed to just like, leave me totally naked with no weapons whatsoever, but he was allowed to just constantly change everything around if that's what he wanted to do, and try and get me addicted to drugs and whatever. That could work. That's maybe worth a think, though it'll probably take a fair bit of setup. John, you seem to be spoilt with sequels to games and series you like right now. What's another game or series you'd like to see a sequel for? I'd be tempted to say Skies of Arcadia, because there was once upon a time chatter of Skies of Arcadia 2, but equally I kind of don't want it to have a sequel, because it was a really good game in its own right, and it had a really good ending, and all the characters had really good arcs, and I feel like any attempt to follow it up would just not be a good idea. Plus, even though I think it's an absolute classic, it's not exactly, desperately overly remembered by everybody, so I don't think it would necessarily be successful as a sequel that made a return these days. I mean, if it were to come back, you'd probably be saying, okay, let's just make an HD remaster of it. Oh, that would be so good. Oh, now I know that could conceptually exist, and it's never going to exist, and now I'm sad. Bit of a broad question, but I write for a YouTube channel which is pushing 1 million subscribers, but has nowhere near as many people on Patreon as many a true nerd. Any tips for improvement in that area? Interesting. I'm not sure, because not knowing what the channel is, I can't really comment on it. Like, I have a couple of working theories about this, which is, I think, say, channels that have ever done sponsored content, it's harder for them to do Patreon, because I personally don't feel like you can really do both. I think you've kind of got to do one or the other. I think it leaves a bad taste in the mouth if, you've taken money from a company to make a video and then you also simultaneously ask for Patreon donations at the same time. So I don't know what the channel is. If they've ever done actual sponsored stuff, I could see why that might put some people off. It also depends on like the tone of the channel. Like, you know, for Many a True Nerd, it's me, pretty much. Like, it's just me sitting in front of a computer, and Claire as well. But, like, you know, Claire is in our household. Claire is well known to everyone. So, Many a True Nerd's a very homespun operation, to be honest. Like, the way we literally put it together, though, you know, we've improved the tech, and, you know, we've got better computers and better editing suites, and all the rest of it since we began. But in some ways, not much has changed since we actually began the channel. Like, you know, the very first Fallout thing we ever put together back in August of 2013 is broadly, you know, broad strokes, the same as what we're doing now. Which is, you know, we play it, it gets captured on a computer, we edit it, it's just one person talking over, we edit it together, and we release it on YouTube, and I suppose technically that's just what literally any YouTuber does. What was my point supposed to be here? Anyway, I think because, like, you know, we're a very small operation, it's all very homespun, that helps, I suppose. Like, if it's a channel where it's like, you know, it's a group of people, and it's all very professional, and they've clearly got their own, like, you know, they've got their own designated office, and it's got a brand, and, you know, they've got their own brand book and whatever, and everything's, like, all nice and swish and whatever, maybe people are less inclined to support that sort of thing on Patreon, because if something like looks super swish and it's all very professional, it's clearly like a professional operation, which is why I think, like, you know, the YouTube side of big, like, gaming journalist sites would never really bother with a Patreon, because I don't think they get much support, because, like, they're seen as, like, a business as opposed to, like, a person. I think Patreon works better for YouTube channels that are like a person, and it's very much clearly that person's personal YouTube channel, I guess. But again, I can't really talk too much about this, because without knowing what the other channel is, I can't really draw valid comparisons, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, that's the best I can do. John, how are you planning to set up Fallout 76 so fans can play with you? Well, for the time being, we're probably just going to be doing it as, like, you know, invited collaborations and whatever. Though I have been seeing in, like, the comments of, I think, just about every video I've made so far, someone spotted themselves in the same session as me. So, you know, there's definitely people in the community floating around who just happen to end up in the same session as me. So that's fine. So, you know, if you happen to just kind of be floating around and you see a Many a True Nerd in the same session as you or whatever, do feel free to, like, you know, come up and say hi. And when I say hi, I'll almost certainly have voice chat disabled for recording purposes, because, like, there's a lot of people who have things like, you know, they don't bother having headphones in, so, like, their audio is an awful feedback loop of nightmares, or, like, you know, they've got a TV on in the background, it's just unpleasant to have it around. So, unfortunately, you'll need to just sort of gesticulate at me. But, you know, you might see me around. What I'm planning to do in terms of community stuff is, as I was saying before, I'm waiting for the private servers. Once we've got private servers, we'll figure out how those work, and we'll get something set up so, like, all the fans can be together, and I can just nip into that server on occasion. We can all play together like that. And we can potentially, like, you know, build something really cool together. So, yeah, watch this space, because I don't know any more server details than you do for the time being. In your opinion, what's the best video title pun you've ever come up with? Ooh, I know that one. It was for Raft. Where the actual title of the video was Sharks and Wreck, as in shipwreck, because it's about, you know, you being shipwrecked and on a raft and sharks attack you. I was very happy with Sharks and Wreck. That was a good title. John, is it weird that until last month I thought you were around 40 years old? I don't give it enough time, I probably will be, you know. No, early 30s, still young and hip and sexy, for now. If you could create your own FTL weapon, what would it be? Ooh, I had a good thought about this. So, how about, like, a really, really powerful beam weapon, but you don't get to aim it? So, like, if it just happens to go across, like, you know, a perfect slice across multiple rooms, it would do absolutely flipping loads of damage, but, like, it just basically just swings around wherever, and it doesn't need to go in, like, a straight line. It can just, like, totally weave off, and if you're unlucky, you can just, like, hit one room and then just weave off into space and just spiral off into the middle of nowhere and do almost nothing. But if you're really lucky, it can, like, you know, flick round in all sorts of directions, hit, like, every room in the ship. So, I don't know how you'd balance it. Maybe it would be quite low power to offset the fact that it's really unpredictable. Maybe it needs to be medium power because it could do loads of damage. Yeah, basically I'd like a super powerful beam weapon, but as a result of its power, or the amount of rooms it theoretically could hit, you have to offset that with the fact that you are not allowed to aim it. You just choose to fire it and it starts firing, and then it just takes care of itself. So, which Crusader King 2 king or queen do you think is the most like, and then a couple of Roman emperors? Okay, let's see if we can do this here. So, Caesar, oh blimey, hey, now I'm just trying to summarise flipping Roman emperors with incredibly complex, histories and legacies and whatnot. Let's just say Caesar, military leader of probably positive intent. You know what, let's actually put that as Conan the Third, because he died, fairly prematurely, and he was the one, if I'm remembering correctly, who actually achieved the independence of Cornwall. I think Cornish independence came under him, so that seems like a good bet. Augustus, the man who founded the empire, but caused a fair bit of trouble while he was doing so. Yeah, well, presumably that has to be Catastrophe, who was indeed the man who founded the empire. Tiberius, a man known for some slightly nasty bureaucracy and a lot of killing. An awful lot of flipping killing. I'll say Connor the Seducer for him. Except I can't, because Caligula and Nero are coming up. Oh no. Okay, wait, hang on. So, yes, Connor the Seducer I think is going to be Caligula and Nero, which leaves Tiberius. Who else do we have with a slightly more questionable legacy? Well, Michelle Ironside certainly did do a lot of murder by the end of his life. So yeah, let's put Michelle in as Tiberius. And that just leaves Claudius, who's my favourite, so King John the Fat gets to be Claudius. Because King John the Fat did a lot of good stuff, damn it. He did a lot of very good things. People didn't think much of him, but he did the important good things, just like Claudius. Any spooky stories from your life, since it'll be Halloween at some point between this post and you recording the podcast? Ooh! Honestly, not much, to be honest. The only thing I can really think of is, when I was young, and sufficiently young that I don't remember this event that clearly, so it's probably just a childish, overactive imagination. When I was in Centre Parks, which is a forest-based, getaway holiday thing. There's, little villas in a forest. There's loads of activities. It's a good place to take families. So I was a kid. My parents took me there. And I remember at night, it definitely had already gone dark. Okay, so I'm not just talking about the sun here. But it had gone dark. And I remember seeing a really bright orange light on the horizon. And I know it just sounds like the sun. But I swear it wasn't the sun. And maybe I'm just misremembering, and maybe it was a dream that I'm assuming was a thing that actually happened. But I swear I once saw a big, almost like an orange dome, through the trees in the distance. And I've no idea to this day what I saw or whether I just dreamt that. It's not exactly that spooky. Basically what I'm saying is I saw a thing and I'm not sure what it was, but it was a sort of orange light thing. No clue. No clue whatsoever. What do you think about the Fallout 76 endgame? Will there be enough content to keep people going for hundreds of hours besides messing around with friends, or will it end up like Sea of Thieves? Ooh, interesting. Interesting. I mean, I can't comment because I've only put in, how many hours have I put in so far? Okay, I put in 4, 2 and 2 in the Xbox, and then I put in another however many it was in the most recent. Was that 4? Was that 4 or 5 or something? I think it might have been 5, 6 hours, and then West Virginia. I've put in barely 20 hours, if that. Okay, so I just can't comment on the end game right now, because until I've seen the entire map, and until I've seen how the game evolves, and what the mid to late game stuff is like in terms of crafting, and how much competition there is for resources and workshops, I just can't comment, so I'm sorry, I can't give my opinion on that, because it would be a totally, uneducated guess. Another question about the old NerdCube podcaster, did I assume, referring to the podcasts. Are you guys planning to restart it? Maybe not quite, but there's certainly discussions about us doing something within the framework of 76, okay? We might do something, we'll see. Who's your favourite Doctor from New Who? Still Matt Smith. I really enjoyed Matt Smith's era, even if it kind of got a bit lost by the end and had quite a few weak episodes and series. I still think Matt Smith did a good job, and even when given a fairly weak script, I think he put in some really good physical performances that were able to take mediocre scripts and turn them into decent or good episodes regardless. So, yeah, for me, Matt Smith. And my favourite Doctor from Classic Who? Sylvester McCoy. Because, yeah, I just think he had a really good blend of, the the happiness and the silliness, but also the darkness, which is one of the reasons I think, a lot of people like David Tennant's Doctor, where there's like, happiness and silliness, but there's also darkness. There's a real tonal variety. And I think Sylvester McCoy did that very well as well. Rich tea or hobnobs? I do like hobnobs, but it depends if there's tea available. If there's no tea available, I'd probably prefer rich tea. If there's tea available for dunking, hobnobs every time. Have you ever played Dwarf Fortress? I think I might have done, very briefly, once upon a time. Someone else has copied at some point. But I've never made a video of it. I've never put much time into it. So maybe at some point. I have heard good things, but I've also heard that it's a very complex game. It takes a lot of learning to get into. So I'm not sure whether it would make the best video. We'll see. I'm not sure. The best and worst things about Fallout 76. Well, I think I was discussing the best there. I think it's right now the potential of it. Like, all the things it could become. So, of course, like, most Fallout games, what they are on launch day is, well, the base game at least. That's going to keep being the base game forever. But 76 is literally going to be whatever the community turns it into. Like, the most exciting, interesting bits of Fallout 76, competition over resources, competition for workshops, building camps, that's all going to be community-led. So for me, the best thing is the potential. The worst thing for now is probably the technical side of it. Like, the console versions stutter a lot. Even the PC version stutters. There have been a lot of problems with the PC launch, or a lot of people didn't get to play the first beta. So there are just some straight up issues that need to be fixed. Together with actually lack of options on the PC version, like there's no brightness slider, and you can't disable depth of field, which I think you really should be able to, because I think the depth of field is too strong in 76, so being able to tone that down a bit or turn it off would be lovely. Lots of people upset by lack of an FOV slider. That doesn't bother me personally, but it would be a nice to have. So yeah, there are some things that just should be there in a PC game that are not there yet. So those are probably the most annoying things for now. Will you be doing a bit at the end of Crusader Kings 2, going through the best moments and lives of the best kings and queens? I'm not sure I'll actually do like an edited together highlights reel, but certainly whenever I do wrap it up, we will 100% go through the family, just revisiting each ruler one by one, and kind of, giving a dramatic telling of the events of Cornwall from start to finish. Certainly that's true. John, what's your best worst game and worst best game? I.e. a game you love, but general opinion is that it's terrible, and a game you just can't love even though it's universally adored. Okay, a game I absolutely adore that a lot of people seem to not like, and since then its sequels come along and people say, oh, the sequel's much better, but I still prefer the original, is Watch Dogs. I really enjoyed Watch Dogs 1, and I personally think Watch Dogs 1 is better than Watch Dogs 2. I prefer the way stealth works in Watch Dogs 1. I prefer the sneaky inny security camera missions, and they were a bit more simple. I prefer that it's a bit more focused. You've got less gadgets to play with, so I feel like the game's got a bit more focus to it. I really like the convoy missions, and they went missing in Watch Dogs 2, and they were the best part of the game. I think the city design is better and more interesting in Watch Dogs 1 than in Watch Dogs 2, so yeah. I personally think Watch Dogs 1 is really damn good. A lot of people didn't rate it that highly and thought the sequel was much better. I personally prefer the original. Now, my worst best game, games that I universally adore I just couldn't get into. I struggled really to get into God of War, the new God of War. It was, much loved, received rave reviews, lots of people absolutely adored it. I just couldn't get into it. I mean, I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was bad. I'm not saying God of War is bad. For me, it was just pretty good. It was okay. It was fine. For me, it was not spectacular. I just couldn't quite understand it, to be honest. I just did not get it. In terms of, the big PS4 exclusives this year, I understand why people love Spider-Man. Spider-Man was great. Absolutely adored Spider-Man. Great game. I just didn't quite get the love for God of War. I just couldn't get into it. Hi John, did you watch parts of Games Done Quick Express last weekend? No, I totally missed that, but now I know it's there. I'm totally going to go and watch some highlights of that later. John, I know you're not really a companion person, but who's the best companion in each Fallout game in your opinion? Okay, I'm going to say Ian in Fallout 1 because I just kind of, have grown to love the fact that he enjoyed murdering me with a 10mm automatic. That was just his thing. It was a nice character trait of his to repeatedly murder me all the time. Fallout 3, it can't not be Fawkes. Fawkes is just an absolute flipping star. New Vegas, it has to be Boone. I love Boone and his grumpy face. And Fallout 4, I'll say Hancock, because Hancock just seemed like... He just seemed like the most chill guy. I quite liked going around with him. He just seemed like a decent, fun guy to get to know. Well, John, I did it. I got married and nothing has changed yet. Ooh, I think this is actually, the finale to the story we've been hearing over the past few months, where yes, we've actually been getting updates from someone who was getting married, and unfortunately was getting married right in the middle of, all the games in the world coming out. And I think me and Claire were repeatedly advising to keep playing video games, like, during the honeymoon, which is probably terrible advice, but I'm pretty sure that's what we were both advising. So, it is a beautiful 85 degrees C here in Las Vegas, and since we live here, we are going to Disneyland for the honeymoon. Ooh, that sounds cool. That sounds very cool indeed. And I had to get new plates for my truck, and there is a nod to MATN, so stay tuned. Haven't arrived yet, I'll send pictures. Ooh, MATN license plates. I approve. The actual question, however, is about Microsoft adding keyboard and mouse support to the Xbox One. Do you see this as a game changer or just a nice to have? Now, I have heard a little bit about this, but admittedly, it's all a bit up in the air right now. There's not a huge amount of detail floating around. It's actually going to be, I think I saw like November 10th being mentioned as a date where there's going to be a few more bits of information floating around about that. I mean, what it's also pretty clear about immediately is they're obviously very aware that just letting some people in competitive multiplayer environments have keyboard and mouse when most people are going to be on controllers is not going to be fair, so they're going to leave it up to individual games as to whether it's going to be enabled or not, and, obviously they're keeping in mind that they may actually have to, do some gatekeeping to keep the keyboard and mouse people away from the controller people, and if they do and not enough people actually have a keyboard and mouse, then those servers could be way too quiet to justify maintaining, or just, you won't be able to get matchmaking in a hurry, so I'm not sure it's going to be a game changer. It might be a nice to have if you happen to use your Xbox One as like a multimedia machine. It's not just a game thing to use it for all sorts of other stuff. The menus are a bit of a pain to navigate. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll be nice to have because maybe that means, PC games that really depend on having a mouse and keyboard available, those can move over to the Xbox One more easily. In terms of it being a game changer for most of the biggest games and most other gamers, I would imagine not, because I can't imagine they're going to let controller users and keyboard and mouse users just mingle without any form of filtering in any major game that lots of people play. I can't see that being the case. John, what do you do if you can't come up with a video title pun? Well, I don't know really. It hasn't really happened in, 5 years. I've never actually, come up with a video where it's like, I cannot come up with anything for this. It's just going to have to be part 25, and that's going to be it. I've always managed to come up with some subtitle, so I don't know. What I do run into sometimes, and this is quite interesting, is I come up with a pun that I like, insofar as I say it out loud and I think it's actually quite nice and it's a good pun, but you write it down and it doesn't work in writing, because some things just look really ugly written down, especially when it comes to capitalization, you see, because I generally tend to follow the rule that in a title you ought to capitalize basically everything apart from connectives and direct and indirect articles. So and the and a ought to not be capitalized, but everything else should be capitalized. And some stuff looks really ugly like that, and I just look at it and think that's not right. So that sometimes is a bit of a problem. I come up with a pun and then I just have to throw it out because I end up thinking that just doesn't look right and I don't like it. Also, have you considered giving the grand finale in a series in episode number 2 would help a lot at the end of a binge watch? Interesting. I feel like it would be messy. I think that would be kind of messy, to be honest, because if it was, game title, and then grand finale title, and then part title, or the other way around, and then a subtitle on the end of that too, I think it would bug me because it would look messy. I think if people are in a binge watch situation, they're behind the times and they're watching the whole thing through, then I make sure there's always a playlist for that, so that would hopefully make things nice and clear. Whereas if you're kind of watching something live as it comes out, then you'll see it as it's on the sub feed. So this is actually the first time anyone's ever raised that, I think, in 5 years. So hopefully it's not a major issue. John, I consider that you have quite a distinctive style, which is part of what I like about your channel, but at least twice now I've mistakenly thought videos from other channels were created by you. Is it frequent for people to confuse you with other YouTubers, or is it just me? I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, because it's not really something that people kind of tell me or don't tell me, so I don't know how often it happens. What I do know is, I find this kind of funny, I have been told, by Americans in the past that they struggle to differentiate between British accents. So, what to me and my ear sounds like very clearly different people, different ears in America can sometimes struggle to tell apart, because apparently the English accents, some of them at least, all sound very, very similar indeed. To the extent where, like, I do see the occasional comment on my videos where clearly someone is commenting, thinking they're commenting on a Nerdcubed video, where they actually address me as Dad. So that happens on not exactly a common basis, but it's not something I never see. It does pop up on a not desperately irregular basis. So that's definitely a thing. Hi John, I was wondering if you had any plans to play a psychological horror game in the near future. Well, relatively near after Fallout 76 and Red Dead Redemption 2 hype. I was planning to do something. There was like a new Cthulhu-ish game. Was it called Call of Cthulhu? Cult of Cthulhu? Something beginning with C of Cthulhu. There was a thing of Cthulhu, and I was planning to do it for Halloween, but in the end, that whole period was just absolutely slammed with flipping everything, with Red Dead 2 and Fallout 76, everything, and now I'm trying to organise, the future collabs of Fallout 76, and Hitman 2's going to show up at some point. I don't know when, but it's going to show up. So, unfortunately, it kind of slipped out, but it might well actually get featured at some point or other, I don't know. I've always wondered how Claire knows what to cut out from the videos. Do you give verbal cues or is it based on her intuition? Really interesting question. Okay, here's a behind the scenes look for you. So, there's kind of 3 classes of video, to my mind. So there's the videos which are kind of like, very similar to the old Why Not Wednesdays, where they're really heavily edited down, lots of visual effects and all of that business. Those pretty much 100% of the time, I will be the one that actually edits them. So I will kind of, take entire sections, like, I'll take a 10-minute section which I was talking of and just say, does that work? Would the video be stronger if we just kind of streamlined that and just kind of got rid of that and just let the section before run section after? And I might make that decision, and like huge chunks of what I've recorded will just hit the editing room floor and you'll never see it. And those videos tend to be, very short, very highly edited. To my mind, they run very smoothly. They're the most polished stuff, which I like putting out on, say, the big slots on like Saturday or whatever. On the other hand, there are videos like, the series are the biggest example of this, but sometimes it's just one-offs, like Party Hard 2, when we did that as a video. This was a good example of this sort of thing, where basically I have made the video, but I look at it and I know, okay, just about everything I've said can stay in the video. It's fine. So all that really needs to happen now is the silencers need to be removed. You close up the speaky bits next to each other. Make sure it all flows nicely. Maybe a couple of little tiny tweaks where, what I'm saying moves a second or two in either direction just to make it nice and smooth and fit alongside what's on screen a little bit better. Honestly, fairly minor stuff. Not really much in the way of editorializing. It just needs to be neatened. And I'll pass that stuff over to Claire. But there's also a bit of middle ground there, which is where Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually living. Because Claire's editing Red Dead Redemption 2, but she's doing it with some assistance that I'm actually giving her. Because obviously I'm watching what's going on, I'm kind of paying attention. Okay, what matters, what doesn't, what do I think just slows down this episode versus what's really kind of interesting and charactery and whatever. So very often, like, after something's happened, I might mutter, yeah, Claire, keep all this in, or yeah, Claire, actually cut all this out, we don't need any of that. Just cut from the point where I said this to the point where this character just started speaking. So, we'll have something like that. And sometimes there's also, I suppose, another bit in the middle, which is, there'll be something which is a bit scruffy, but is mostly fine, where I'll put in what I call pre-cuts, where I will take the raw footage, I'll put it into an editing program, and I'll take out, one 10-minute chunk I know I don't want to be there, and I'll take out one 5-minute chunk that's later in the video that I also know isn't supposed to be there. Then I'll just close up those gaps, and I'll save that file, and I'll pass that file over to Claire. So she'll do the rest of it. I just took out 2 big chunks that I knew I didn't want to actually have in the video. So I'll sometimes put pre-cuts in for Claire, but after I've done that, which only takes like 30 seconds, at that point Claire can just handle the rest of it. So that's kind of like the different styles of video that end up getting made. Hi John, what's your favourite running gag from a series you've done and why is it still Hello Headquarters? It actually kind of is still Hello Headquarters, but that's kind of like a running gag within a single series. In terms of like something that just kind of quietly floats around in the background, I do quite like The Bear Is Still Around, because that's kind of, permeated a lot of different series, and I try not to draw attention to it, but whenever there's a bear floating around, just, in any game, I do try and just occasionally mention about the bear still being around. And I don't draw attention to the reference, I don't try and repeat the cadence, and I don't do the whole, I really hope the bear's not still around. The bear is still around, the bear's still around, the bear's still around. I don't try and repeat that at all. I just kind of, try and just gently insert into my discussion about the bear, the fact that the bear is still around. So I like the fact whenever there's a bear, I always try and get that in. That's always lovely. But in terms of, a running joke within a single series, hello, headquarters! Yeah, that's still my favourite, you're right. With Christmas just around the corner, have you got any plans for special videos? And is there any chance of a hint of what's to come? I would give you a hint, Ryan, but I do not know. Last year's kind of, Christmas video was... that was a really weird game. That was like the Turkey of Christmas Past, which just kind of like found in December at some point, because I just went looking for the most obscure Christmas game I could find, which I quite enjoyed doing. I quite enjoyed just looking for the most weird Christmas game that I was able to find, so I might just do that again. Because I like there being something out on Christmas. But then again, the year before that, that was when we did the Hitman Christmas special. So, like, if a game decides to do a little special update for Christmas, I might well decide to do that. It just kind of depends what happens or doesn't. If you were picked up and placed in Cornwall at the current time of your Crusader Kings 2 run, where do you honestly think you would naturally fit into society? Location, role, etc. I'm gonna end up dead. Like, you know how there's the occasional event where someone gets dragged in front of the king or the emperor because they're like, a heretic or whatever, and they get burnt at the stake? That would be me. Because I'd be like too loud and annoying and asking too many questions and not just keeping my head down and getting on with my lot in life. So I'm pretty sure I'd just be bumped off as a heretic almost immediately. Regarding Overwatch, I remember you saying on Twitter that Moira looked interesting to you when she was announced, but I don't remember seeing a follow-up. Good point. I did actually play a little bit of Moira when she came out. I couldn't really get to grips with it. I didn't actually enjoy it that much. So I have just defaulted back to Mercy. I do just enjoy playing Mercy. Pictures of Tabby often feature Tabby's quilt. What is the origin of the quilt itself? I think Claire made it, but I'm going to hand over to editing Claire right now because she'll be able to tell you better than I can.
Yes, that's right. I did make Tabby's quilt. I love that we're referring to it as Tabby's quilt now. I made that years ago. I took a one-day quilting class with my best friend because we both wanted to try out quilting, and that's the quilt I made. It's a little lap quilt, so before it was Tabby's quilt, in fact, before we adopted Tabby, it just lived wherever the largest amount of books was so that you could have it on your lap while you were reading. But I put it on the bed in my office one time when I was recording a video so that there was like a pop of color in the background, and Tabby sat on it during the recording of that video. And that was basically all she wrote because Tabby didn't move from it the rest of the day. She decided she was gonna sleep on that quilt forever, and now we can't move it from Tabby's bed anymore. So Tabby's quilt, Tabby's bed, that's kind of how it works with cats.
Hi John, can you explain the significance of high tea or afternoon tea to a non-UK lad like myself? Okay, so the vast majority of people in England won't really do high tea or afternoon tea. High tea or afternoon tea is like a special thing you'd probably go out to a fancy tea shop for. Quite possibly if you have guests visiting and you want to do something that's like, stereotypically formal or a bit posh, like going for high tea at the Ritz or whatever. Like, as a general rule, an average person, even if they're like at home, won't actually do anything that actually looks like high tea or afternoon tea. If you're a heavy tea drinker, you'll just have tea dotted around and there won't actually be any form of service of high tea. But I think what it represents is it's just a fancy, vaguely posh ritual that is quite useful for meeting people in a formal but not excessively formal and not particularly long format. So you can just kind of, sit down with someone, enjoy the high tea for like half an hour and then move on with your day. So it doesn't take as much time as like a full meal would. So I'd say that's probably the significance of it. But yeah, it probably is more about, the idea of high tea at the Ritz, where it's supposed to be a very fancy, posh thing. It's not really something that people actually do. And a follow-up question, what is a fry-up? Well, that one's simple. You get a frying pan, you slap stuff in it, and you fry it until it's delicious. It's a breakfast thing, you see. John, how do you feel about people who refuse to use the Oxford comma? They'll be the first against the wall when the revolution comes, don't you worry. John, do you have any views on Norm MacDonald? Unfortunately not, because I literally did to look up who this guy is. Assuming we're talking about the same guy, this appears to be a Canadian comedian. Unfortunately, I've never heard any of his material and know nothing about him, so I'm afraid I can't really give you an opinion on that one. How do you shave, John? I'm interested. Well, I'm interested in this too, because I've long wondered whether one of two things is true, which is, one, I'm just terrible at shaving, or two, I am the most fussy person in the world when it comes to my own chin and upper lips and all of that, because I double shave. And I don't know if this is in any way common or if this is just my secret shame, because what I do is, first, I have a quick kind of preliminary shave with an electric razor just to get the worst of it off. But then after that, I have a wet shave because I feel like if I don't do that, I've not got a good enough finish. And I always felt that was probably because, like, you know, I just didn't have a very good electric razor. If I had a better electric razor, then I wouldn't need to do the wet shave. So I actually spent quite a bit of money on a really nice, fancy razor, and the exact same thing happened. I noticed no difference in the performance whatsoever, and I kept doing the wet shave after. So I double shave, and I'm not sure if that's common or not. I passed a school the other day that had a sign out front for Troy Story. I don't know whether that's a misspelling of Toy Story, but now I can't stop thinking about it. What do you think Troy Story would be about? You know, weirdly, they've stumbled across something quite interesting there, which is, you know, one of the big framing devices of more in the first Toy Story than the later ones, to be honest, was obviously, you know, the toys were inanimate when Andy was around, and Andy would, like, you know, pick them up and make them do what he wanted. And he kind of imposed this repeated narrative of there was a bank robbery and Woody arrives and then, you know, everything gets set to right. But Andy gets to dictate the narrative. And when Buzz Lightyear arrives, it appears the narrative changes, though we never see it in detail. But, you know, we clearly get the view that all of a sudden Buzz becomes the hero of the story. And, you know, he zaps Woody and Woody gets blasted away. We never actually, like, see exactly what the full story is. But, yeah, that's in one of, like, the musical montages, I think. So we see that happening, though by the end of it, Woody and Buzz together are sorting out, like, the robberies in the Wild West, like we see in the really animated bits at the beginning of Toy Story 3. But in some ways, that's actually a really good analogy for the Iliad, because the toys are mortals and Andy represents the Olympian gods. Which is sure, when the gods aren't paying attention, the mortals can just get on with their own business. But the moment the god enters the room, the mortals at that point, basically they have no agency whatsoever. The gods can just basically pick them up and make them batter against each other and just say, okay, now you are going to fight you and you're going to be defeated, not because you were weaker or more cowardly or because you deserve to lose, but because I have arbitrarily said, as the god who gets to basically pick up these action figures and play with them, that you are going to lose, so therefore it's going to happen, and now you're going to go to prison, or in the case of the Iliad, you're going to be stabbed and die. So, weirdly, Toy Story as a setup works really, really well for the Iliad. So, yeah, actually, whoever actually wrote that might just be a bit of a classicist genius. Back in the Infinity War podcast, you suggested that you might make MCU podcasts a regular thing. Is that still in the pipeline? And whilst we're on the subject, what do you think about Ant-Man and the Wasp, as well as the Captain Marvel trailer? So, I might well do something, like me and Claire might just, you know, have a chat about Infinity War Part 2, or whatever it ends up being called. I think it still doesn't have a title at this point, so that might be a thing. I don't know for certain one way or the other. Ant-Man and the Wasp, I thought was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was my favourite. It definitely wasn't my least favourite. It was kind of mid-table for Marvel, but that's not a bad thing to be honest. Like, even my least favourite Marvel films, like Thor 2, they're still decent and solid, and there's still a good few lines and some good action scenes and whatever in them. So it's not exactly like that's, you know, a criticism. I'd say mid-table Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's still a really good, solid, fun movie. And I like the franchise. I like the fact it's less like, you know, ridiculously bombastic, over the top, oh, we must do this or the world will explode. The world's not going to explode. This isn't even an Avengers film. Don't pretend that the villain of your solo film poses any real risk to the world, alright? Because he doesn't. So don't even pretend it. But yeah, the stakes seem to be a little bit, well, smaller, which is somehow appropriate, isn't it? And yeah, I think the cast does a good job. I think the supporting cast is fun. I like the slightly more jokey tone. I wish in some ways it had actually been a bit more joking and light-hearted. It felt like that bit was a bit kind of toned down from the first film. Like the original Ant-Man, it felt like, yeah, it was a comedy in the form of a superhero thing. In many ways. Ant-Man and the Wasp was, yeah, a proper traditional superhero film, but with little bits of comedy sprinkled through it. And I think I enjoyed it more when it was a bit more comedy focused. So I'm hoping Ant-Man 3 goes back in that sort of a direction. John, have you heard of EDF 4.1? It's a game about fighting off giant hordes of giant insects with ludicrous weaponry. I have not, but I shall look into it. In honour of Halloween, what do you think would be a cool costume based on a Fallout character? Codsworth. Just like create like a big spherical, like, silver thing that you could, like, put around, like, your torso, and then just, like, wrap your arms in, like, tin foil, and then, like, create, like, little cardboard fake, like, buzzsaws and whatever to actually have on the end of your hands. That'd be cool. That'd be very cool. I'd be in favour of that. Are you planning on doing a review of the console edition of Stellaris when it comes out? Yes, I will definitely look at it because I'm really curious about how it plays and in particular how performance is. So there'll definitely be a video on it, but I don't really plan for that to be the start of a new series. Now, when Stellaris 2.2, the Le Guin update comes, together with the Mega Corporation expansion, oh yes, that's gonna be a new series. Obviously, yes. That's going to be, yeah, some exciting stuff. I'm kind of hoping that's going to happen sooner rather than later, because they're still being very cagey on when that's going to occur. But if, Crusader Kings 2 could end just in time for a new Stellaris run to begin, that'd be flippin' spot on. John, one question from Unirob and two from his brother. Have you ever considered learning a musical instrument? I already tried when I was younger. I am one of these people who does not have the gift for it. Some people are just, naturally talented in certain directions. And there are two things in my life I know I am very not good at, okay? One is musical instruments and the other is dancing. Because I have appalling coordination of feet and body and whatever. So dancing is just a thing I cannot do. And musical instruments just do not come naturally to me. Like, I spent years trying to learn the violin when I was a kid, alright? And I managed to get up to grade 1 with merit. And that was it. That was pretty much my talent glass ceiling right there. I couldn't do any more than that. So, yeah, I'm not really a musical person in that regard. Have you ever played Freedom Force or its successor, Freedom Force versus the Third Reich? They're really entertaining superhero strategy games in the style of Silver Age comic books. I have heard of them, and I'm pretty sure I've seen footage in the past. I've never played them myself. I would need to look into how playable they are these days, because, yeah, if they're getting on a bit, it kind of varies as to how easy it is to actually play them on modern PCs. But I will certainly look into it. And in the ending to Fallout 4, what are your thoughts on Synth Sean? Do you think Bethesda could have done more with the character, and if so, what would you have done had you been writing the story? I don't really have a solution to Synth Sean. I assume you mean, like, yeah, the little kid at the end. The problem to my mind isn't really necessarily that he exists. The fact that he's basically thrown out just right at the end of the game when, up to that point, you just kind of run into him in the Institute, but he only becomes a character you interact with in a meaningful way when he basically leaves the Institute by running up to you at the point where you're destroying the Institute, and then he just goes and hangs out at one of your settlements thereafter. That was just too late in the game, to be honest. I think potentially it could have been a lot more interesting had he entered the story at an earlier stage of things, because then there could have been a balance of the two Seans against each other, which could have actually potentially been rather interesting. So you'd have these two characters that would both speak to you and potentially give you contradictory advice and contradictory quest objectives, for example. So, you'd have the original Sean, who was actually your real biological son, but he grew up in a very alien environment without you, and now you barely recognise him anymore. And on the other hand, you've got the synth Sean, who's, still a kid, and very much treats you like, you're his father or mother, so acts like you would anticipate a child would act, but he's a synth, and you don't know whether that's actually real or not, or whether it's programmed into him, and yeah, at that point it sort of becomes interesting, because if you had these two different perspectives from two different Seans, like, are either of them the real Sean anymore? Are you kind of obliged to pay attention to one more than the other? And then it might get a bit interesting if, like, say, the ending of Fallout 4 was actually, okay, we're going to go blow up the Institute, but doing that is going to lead to the shutdown of all the synths because the central command system shuts down. So, like, at that point you get to the stage where you say, if you want to destroy the Institute, rather than going and joining them, then you have to accept that Synth Sean is going to die. And that might have been interesting if Synth Sean had been a compelling character that actually you knew earlier in the game. So, I don't have an easy solution to that one, but I think there's more they could have done, and I think basically just making the kid more of an active character who is actually, at your settlement, and you had to, like, do stuff with and maybe travel around with to do something earlier in the game might have helped with that sort of thing. John, thanks for the positivity around 76. What do you see as being the biggest learning curve coming from 3 or 4? Interesting question. You suggested the perk card system as like a follow-up. That certainly takes a little bit to get your head around, but once you get it in like 5 or 10 minutes, that's actually pretty easy to manage, because it kind of unfolds very naturally and slowly over time, so it's pretty easy to keep on top of. I'd say it's actually the number of enemies, and that's something I keep being guilty of, even after like 20 or so, probably more like 25 hours in the game at this point, which is, and this is, to Bethesda's credit, the number of enemies is way, way higher. Like, in a given building, there's like 4 or 5 times more enemies than you would expect if you were playing Fallout 4. Like, the crowds of enemies, there are a flipping lot of them. And that makes sense, because you yourself are travelling around, potentially, in a team of 4. But it means I'm constantly underestimating how many enemies are going to be there. Like, I kill a certain number of enemies, and I think, okay, that must be all of them. And it never is. There's always, like, twice as many again. So, that's something I still need to mentally adjust to, that there are a lot more enemies. And I'm not really sure how they work yet. I need to investigate this, because I'm not sure if the game kind of spawns some in where you can't see them. Like, there's only a certain number of enemies to start off with, but then more get spawned in just to create more of a challenge. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I'm suspicious there is a certain amount of enemy spawning going on, but I can't prove it. So, I'll look into that at some point. John, let's hear your best cheesy porno script plot, but the twist is you can only use current political leaders. Okay, I'm going to use currently active politicians instead. So, what we've got is the setting is going to be Brussels, alright, and David Cameron is going to walk into a room, and obviously there's going to be, there's going to be cheesy music going on in the background this whole time. So David Cameron comes in for his private meeting with Angela Merkel, and he's going to be talking about how he's ready to take the UK out of the EU, and Angela Merkel is going to be like, really flirtily trying to tell him, how about you just stay in, and basically that's actually it. At that point, we just kind of go backwards and forwards a bit on out and in related puns, and then they have sex. So it's basically, David Cameron and Angela Merkel just having sex, yes. John, what are your thoughts on Meltan, the melted metal Pokemon? My thoughts on that are the same as pretty much everything after the 4th generation, which is me being a grumpy old man and yelling, "Get off my lawn! It was better back when there were 250 Pokemon. That was plenty enough. In fact, the 150 were better. The next 100, some of them were really rubbish." And, my generation then forgets that we actually had Voltorb and Electrode, who were just basically like, Pokeball with eyes, and then Pokeball but upside down, but with slightly different eyes. So, Pokemon weren't exactly spectacular back then either, but still, I do feel slightly aggrieved and get off my lawn of pretty much all new Pokemon at this point. Have you got any fun ideas for Fallout 76 challenge runs? Again, as I was saying earlier, it's not so much about challenge runs for me, it's about building interesting stuff together. Like, I want to maybe try and create a team to actually create single-player quests to see if I could lure other players into actually doing what's effectively a single-player quest with the assistance of, like, other players who are playing the part of NPCs. I want to work on building. I want to kind of, do some fun collaborations with other YouTubers and stuff. I do want to do the great community John Hunt as soon as we've got a private server, as I said earlier. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about for the time being. Because I want to experience 76 as fresh as possible when it launches, I haven't been watching the beta playthrough videos. Could you summarise some of the technical highlights you've discovered during the beta? Technical highlights, that's interesting. To try and keep this as non-spoiler as possible for you, I suppose I'll say, technically, though there is the odd frame rate stutter, things like, say, the colour and the lighting and the density of the environment is as good as Fallout has ever been. Like, it's such a step up from Fallout 4, just because the landscape is a lot more interesting, there's a lot more hills, there's a lot more rivers, there's a lot more mountains dotted about, there's a lot more trees, a lot more foliage, so you can kind of try and hide from each other and stalk creatures and sneak around in shadow and stuff like that. There's a lot of really cool stuff in that regard. The God Rays, even on console, are really, really nice, by the way, which is kind of cool. As I was talking about earlier, the amount of creatures that seem to be kind of on the map simultaneously is a lot higher than it was in Fallout 4. So these days, actually, when you get swarmed by ghouls, it genuinely feels like you're being swarmed by a giant pack of zombies, which never really happened in Fallout 4. Like, you wouldn't really get more than, say, 6, maybe 8 ferals on screen at any one time. But it's not uncommon in 76 to see, like, a giant herd of, like, 20 ferals and potentially get totally swarmed by them. I've managed to avoid getting swarmed by them myself, but I have heard stories of people who just got themselves totally surrounded by a swarm of zombies and just got torn apart. And it's really cool that that's a thing that can happen. John, will you be playing New California at any point? Yes. Probably not till 2019, but 100% yes. John, unlike a lot of YouTubers, you seem to be keeping an open mind about Fallout 76. You always said that this type of multiplayer game could consume a large portion of your life. It could. I'd be horribly worried about getting addicted to online multiplayer games. Do you think 76 has the potential to keep you hooked? It probably does, but thankfully, this job keeps me nice and busy, so I've got plenty of other things to do. Plus, there's plenty of other things I can be equally hooked on, like, Crusader Kings 2 and Total War and Stellaris and all the other Paradox games I haven't got round to yet, but I'm sure I'll be just as hooked onto. And, Fallout stuff as well that's not 76, like continuing to do deep dives into the really, really interesting big total conversion mods that exist in the Fallout space in Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas. And of course, there's always the one thing that's a very good anchor for me just playing Fallout 76 for 24 hours straight, which is, if I do that, I know in the back of my mind the whole time, everything I'm recording, I do have to edit at some point. So that's what stops me. That's what stops me just playing it non-stop at any point. The fact that I know that whatever I do, I have to flipping edit. So if I record too much, I've just got a giant pile of editing to do. So hopefully that'll keep me grounded. And apparently, it was also your birthday on the 26th. You are officially old. Happy birthday! Have you ever suffered fatigue from playing a long game series and got bored of it for the channel or in your normal gaming? It did sort of happen to me with Mass Effect Andromeda. It did happen with Mass Effect Andromeda, which I think is not as bad a game as a lot of people say. I think it's, not a bad game at all, but the problem wasn't so much that it was a bad game. The problem was it was an alright game that just went on and on and on, but didn't really have the story beats that kept me going. Because, what ultimately kept me going in Mass Effect 2 and 3, well, actually, Mass Effect 2 and 3 are both very good games in their own right, but what really kept me glued to my seat in Mass Effect 2 and 3 was that Mass Effect 1 did such a spectacular job setting up this universe and these characters, and I was so engaged with the story and the setup that I wanted to know what happened next to the characters and what would happen ultimately with the universe and what would be the ending for all of these big things that were brought up in the first game. Mass Effect 1 did a fantastic job doing that. Andromeda, though gameplay-wise I think it was polished and slick, it just had the problem that not enough interesting stuff happened. It was, in some ways, a fairly bland, stereotypical, dull, sci-fi-ish plot. Human goes to new place, has to set up colonies. Oh no, there are bad aliens. We must stop them in order that we can have the colonies that were previously mentioned. And I just struggled to be interested. I didn't care what happened to any of the characters. That was the problem. Even though the level design was fine and the voice acting was mostly okay, the faces were obviously terrible, but most of the actual landscapes outside of the faces were actually very pretty. I just couldn't bring myself to care about the characters. When I didn't care about the characters, I didn't really have any reason to continue, which I think is why that series just never quite got itself finished. Like, at some point, maybe when Claire's on holiday, I might just do a massive live stream just to get it done, just so I've seen what the ending is, but then, admittedly, they already announced that, that game was apparently so unpopular that it pretty much managed to kill the possibility of any sequels, and if there is another Mass Effect game, it will not be in the same universe, so it kind of feels a bit pointless, to be honest, but yeah, probably the best example I can think of that was Andromeda. Greetings, John. Do you make a lot of bug or unbalanced issue feedbacks to dev teams when you're testing games in the alpha or beta phases? Do you use or share your maybe unused footage to highlight those? Wondering this from the odd glitches in the Fallout 76 videos. Not specifically, but generally as a kindness, like whenever I publish a video, or sometimes even beforehand, I will let the devs see it, especially if it's in alpha and beta, and they're actually looking for feedback and looking for people to say, okay, this works, this doesn't, I don't understand this, I do understand that. And I know for a fact that one of the big things that very regularly does get changed more than other things, presumably because it's a bit easier to do, is tutorials get changed based on YouTuber feedback. Like when YouTubers seem to miss a system or we don't understand how something works, very often tutorials will get slightly changed. So it's kind of very useful for these people to get a fresh perspective, I think. So this is not uncommon that I'll play a game in alpha, and then if I ever kind of glance back in on it later when it launches, the tutorials have changed very dramatically, even if the actual game seems remarkably similar. I think YouTubers can be quite useful for that sort of business. So I'll very often let them know the video exists in case they want to look for it to get a new perspective. For the most part, I don't do actual formal bug tickets or whatever, because very often there isn't actually a proper mechanism or platform through which to submit those from the outside. So yeah, Hopefully I help out, but it's not quite as formal as you were suggesting. Also, how would you explain the difference between dusk and twilight to non-native English speakers? Ooh, interesting. Okay, I'm about to be wrong here, and Claire, who's much better at English than me because she actually, learnt it properly, as opposed to me who just kind of picked it up by, being English, I suspect, and I kind of treat dusk as specifically referring to the time in which the sun is setting. And I refer to twilight as the conditions created by dusk. Okay, now that's probably not true. Those are probably technically, the same thing, but I consider dusk to refer to time and twilight as conditions created by that time. That's probably wrong, but that's how I use the words. Why does Editing Claire sound different to you when doing these recordings? Is it that she doesn't have to speak as loudly when recording? Hate to break it to you, John, you're loud. I am, I'm afraid. I kind of do the projection voice all the time. But probably the reason Claire and I sound different is because we're recording in different locations. So I'm sitting in one spot right now where I'll typically record my PC videos, which is where I'm doing this. And when Claire does her bits, she'll be sitting in a different spot, which is probably why we sound a bit different when you go over to Editing Claire. So sorry about that if it's very noticeable. Hopefully Hitman 2 will let you buy individual episodes that you want rather than forcing you to buy it all together. Interesting observation. This was kind of phrased as an observation rather than a question, but I'll give my take on it regardless, which is I find it very unlikely they'll do that because the original Hitman got such a lot of flack for being episodic, so they're going to want to stay as far away from episodic as possible. So they're going to sell this as a more traditional game experience because that was what a lot of people said they wanted after the original Hitman, and it caused the original Hitman a bunch of trouble. So I would strongly imagine you can't do that. The only way you'll be able to do that is you'll be able to buy the DLC levels that come later individually if you want, but the first 6 will totally be sold as a bundle, and I think that's actually been fully confirmed at this point. Have you heard the new song Head Above Water from Avril Lavigne? And if so, what are your thoughts? I had to just go and listen to it now because I had not heard it before. It's fine. I mean, it sounds like a decent song. The problem is, I just listened to it 30 seconds ago, and I already probably couldn't sing it back to you. It doesn't strike me as particularly memorable. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. But, my favourite Avril Lavigne songs are the ones that, you'll keep humming and whistling and singing to yourself forever. And I can't really see myself doing that for that one. So, yeah, it's not bad, but it's definitely not her best. That last hour and a bit of the jet lag live stream was amazing. Oh, maybe from your point of view. I was very tired. You need less sleep more often. That's not true. Okay? I've been getting not enough sleep recently. I'm very tired, and Claire keeps making slightly concerned noises at me because I think she can tell I'm quite tired in a minute, so... Do you know how much you made in the way of donations after the game already ended? Sadly, I don't. There's no way of actually telling that. The back-end system for YouTube, the most granular it shows us in terms of earnings is by day. I think I can break down views right down to the minute if I use the real time. But the donations in the super chats, there's no way of breaking that down, I think, to any smaller amount than day. So sadly, I can't actually, tell, what actually came in, after the end of the stream. But I've got to assume it was quite a bit, yes. With Bethesda doing the beta with set time slots, do you think this could start a new trend, or is it just Bethesda being Bethesda and not having tons of experience with multiplayer? I understand why they're doing it. Because, up to this point, the Bethesda launcher has not really been a massive thing. It's been floating around, but it's never been tested with a big multiplayer release like Fallout 76. And they don't have a huge amount of experience with this. Because, as I've said previously, in fact, actually earlier this very Patroncast, yeah, Elder Scrolls Online does okay. By all accounts, it does okay, and it's got a dedicated, happy player base, but the scale of it is totally different to what we're seeing right now with 76. And they were betting big on 76. If you went to EGX this year, the amount of flipping 76 posters everywhere, and all of them were pushing, the beta begins on this date on Xbox. You can pre-order now in order to get access to the beta. They were pushing that so flipping hard, constantly. This is going to be so many orders of magnitude bigger than what they've done before. So I can understand why they want to use the beta period to, exactly like they said, break at early test application. They wanted to squeeze people into these narrow timeframes to see if their servers could take the strain. And I think, for the most part, it's worked pretty well. The Xbox One was pretty smooth. They had a bit of jitteriness with the PC launcher and whatever on the first of the PC sessions, but they did quite significantly extend the following session, which I think kind of brought them some goodwill back. I think they were just being cautious, because they were very aware this was going to be huge and the launch is going to be even flipping bigger, and they wanted to make sure they were ready for it. So I don't think this is going to start a trend. I'm not even sure it'll start a trend for Bethesda themselves if they make more multiplayer spin-offs like Multiplayer Dishonored, which, I just keep wanting more and more now I've thought about it as a possibility that might exist. I'm not necessarily sure they'll do it again. I think next time they'll probably have the experience to know what they're doing. They won't need to do that quite so much. But, I think it was just Bethesda being Bethesda, but probably being quite sensible on this occasion. Is Halloween a thing where you are? And if it is, will you give out candy? Interesting thing about Halloween in the UK, it's kind of an opt-in situation, which is, I did see a couple of kids in costume walking around, but they don't go up to, all the houses in a line trying to do trick-or-treating or asking for candy or whatever. What they do instead is they only go up to the houses that have set Halloween decorations outside. Like, if you set up Halloween decorations in your house, that means you've basically opted into Halloween, and thus kids feel that it's okay for them to approach the house and do that whole business. But if you haven't set up any Halloween decorations, you've not opted into Halloween, so no one comes and bothers you. So for the entire evening, we didn't get one kid coming to our door because we didn't set out the decorations for it. So Halloween is a bit of a thing, but, it's not for everybody, and only a fairly small minority of people actually opt into taking part. And a follow-up to that, thanks for showing me Wandersong. It's been great all the way through. It is a great little game, isn't it? It's a very cute little game. That one really took me by surprise with how good it was. John, your videos inspired me to try a little challenge run by myself. I had this idea for a while. Fallout 4 no perks run. Just special ones for now. Companions and others are allowed, with a major focus on drugs, alcohol, and maybe trading. Any advice for the character build and tactics? If you're not allowed to, do any form of perks whatsoever, then your crafting options are extremely limited, and your damage boosting options are extremely limited. I'd say you'd probably have to go for melee, actually. Melee's got to be your best bet, because guns, you cannot boost the damage of your guns, because you can't take any of the perks that let you craft better guns, and you can't actually take, riflemen or whatever. Though I suppose, if you were just to find components on guns you found floating around, you could get your guns to, keep up. But your best bet would still be melee, because you could do that with melee anyway. I think there's more reliable, good, decent, high-quality melee drops floating around, especially in Nuka World. If you could make it to Nuka World pretty early, then there are some pretty decent guaranteed drops of some powerful melee weapons floating around there, which would be pretty easy to get hold of. And if you're boosting your strength, and you prioritise strength and endurance, then you can have plenty of hit points to take the few bullets while you're running up to people. And strength means you are actually boosting your melee damage, even if you're not able to take the perks that further boost melee damage. So, I'd say probably melee works pretty nicely. And of course, that also syncs up well with drugs and alcohol, because they also come with plus strength. So, I'd say basically just go down the melee route and see what happens there. Hi John and team, inspired by your recent Skyrim series, I recently finished a Skyrim playthrough where I used items which only have 0 armor and damage stats to force magic to be used exclusively. Any ideas for alternate rule setting games that you don't think you'll use in this series, i.e. favourite rejected suggestions? I do have a rather fun one for Fallout, which I'll never use. Well, probably I'll never use. It might make a fun one-off in Fallout 4, I'm not sure, but I've always kind of had a fondness for the I don't know how to reload run, which basically says that you do not know how to reload a gun, understandably. So basically, when a gun runs out of the very first clip that's loaded into it, you have to throw it away. At that point, that gun has to just be dropped forever. So you just get rid of that gun, and you can never use it thereafter. So basically, every gun can be used for only one clip. So you have to always make sure you know where the next clip's coming from, and you're not allowed to use, melee weapons or unarmed or, your bare fists or anything. No explosives either. You're literally allowed to use guns, and you're only allowed to have one clip in the gun. So, like, you know, if you find a missile launcher, you can pick it up, fire the one missile out of it, then immediately have to throw it away and never use it again. Obviously, that's only that missile launcher. If you found a different missile launcher, you could pick that one up. That would be absolutely fine. So, yeah, I've always figured that might make just a fun little one-off. But, yeah, it always struck me as one of the more interesting challenges that I doubt would actually have enough longevity to be, like, you know, a proper full series. But as a live stream or a one-off, it might be a fun video. Pikachu is two Japanese words together. Pika, meaning sparkle, or indeed just the noise like electricity makes, like we would say buzz in English, for example, and chew, which is the noise that a mouse makes. So its real name is Sparkle Squeak, which I actually did know, because back when Pokemon was just starting to become a thing, N64 magazine, which I used to be a subscriber to, is a very good magazine, they actually, included the etymology of Pikachu, so I have actually known that for many years. I just want to let you know I named my horse after you, John, and he's the best horse ever, though he has broken his leg once. Marvellous, thank you very, very much indeed. Since you've already started a Fallout 76 playthrough with the beta, are you planning on continuing with the same character with the actual game or starting over? And I'm assuming you're referring, given this was made, a few days ago, to the Xbox version rather than the PC version. So yes, I have indeed already done a start over. I was very keenly aware of that. I was very keenly aware of the fact that, you know, I showed a bit at the beginning of the game when I did the West Virginia event, then there was more beginning of the game when I actually kind of did the Xbox version, then I did it again a third time with PC. So what was really important to me was I didn't really have repetition. So, like, you know, in the PC version, I took a different route to actually get to Flatwoods. And when I got to Flatwoods, you know, I very carefully made sure to kind of, you know, hunt down some stuff I hadn't seen before so I could talk about, like, different stories and plots and audio tapes in Flatwoods that I hadn't previously covered. And then I very carefully went a different direction. So in the Xbox version, I kind of kept following the Responders plot immediately and headed north to Morgantown, whereas in the actual PC version, I just headed south down towards the workshop and all the stuff that's down there and towards, like, the nuke factory and whatever. So I did my best, even though I did, like, you know, the same bit multiple times, to do it in a different way. So I'm hoping that was all right. No one seemed to complain about that it was repetitive, so hopefully I did that about right. Also, have you been watching The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina? Me and Claire just watched the first episode, which we thought was okay. Didn't exactly blow our minds away. We didn't think it was bad either. So, you know, we'll watch a little bit more of it yet. So, you know, we weren't quite 100% convinced in either direction. But it was alright. It's pretty good, actually, yeah. Have you ever seen the Zelda Link to the Past Super Metroid randomizer? It puts both games into one ROM and then randomizes all the items between both games. I've never seen that being played, but it does sound utterly ridiculous. And if actually, it was at the recent Games Done Quick event, I will try and catch it when I see all the videos from that. On Fallout 76, I know you can have up to 5 characters per account. Can you transfer items from one of your characters to another? I am pretty sure you cannot. And it kind of wouldn't matter if you could, because if you were to, like, you know, have a high-level item and you passed it to a low-level character, they just wouldn't be able to use it because of the level restrictions. Which is one of the things I have a bit of an issue with in Fallout 76, because, the problem that it's got is some quest rewards do seem to be, like, absolutely hard-locked to a particular level. Which is kind of wrong, because the quests don't give you any indication what level you should be. So if you complete a quest early, you're stuck with a reward that you won't be able to use for 10 levels, so it's kind of pointless. And if you get to a quest like later than the game's expecting you to, then the level of the reward's too low and the item's already totally useless to you, because inferior equipment of a higher level will already be doing, like, more damage if it's a weapon. So that's a bit of a problem, and I honestly don't know why it's a problem, because Bethesda clearly know how to solve this issue, because they solved it in Skyrim, which is when you pick up a, you know, unique special quest reward, like, the amount of damage it does is fixed by your level. So if the game's going to give you a special unique reward item, then just fit it to the player's level. And then to avoid it falling behind, if an item is a legendary or a unique, have a mechanism where at a workbench it can be upgraded to a new level. Because in all fairness, if what I do when I get to level 10 is I scrap my level 5 armor in order to craft level 10 armor, then why can't I just upgrade the armor from level 5 to level 10 for the same amount of resources as I would have to spend building the level 10 armor anyway? Like, that would just be more efficient. The end result would be the same, and it would mean that you wouldn't, like, you know, be stuck in a situation where you get a really good legendary drop, but then you're stuck just not using it because it's just so inferior in terms of, like, damage resistance or whatever. Or if you want to keep using it, you're basically screwing yourself over, And that's not good. Like, if you found yourself a really awesome quest reward and you want to keep using it because it's really cool, then, like, you shouldn't be penalised for that by not being allowed to use it. Or if you keep using it, then eventually the game says, actually, no, you can't use this anymore because it's fallen behind. Even though it's supposed to be, like, a super elite, legendary, quest-specific mega weapon that's really important to you, you're going to stop using it anyway because, you know, it's not as good as some random bit of wood with a nail sticking out of it just because that happens to have a base higher level. It's very odd. That is actually a big thing and something they need to sort out with like quest specific and unique items. Like they need to be upgradable and they need to start off being tied to your level, so when you get given a reward you can actually use it either immediately or very soon. Like, you know, if you're level 13 and the item they give you is, you know, locked to level 15, that'd be okay, because that's really nice and close by. But, like, you know, if you're level 13 and it's level 25 locked, that's annoying, because then it just feels like it's a very long way off. It just feels like you've been screwed out of the reward for doing a quest that, in all fairness, was harder for you to do, because if it was a higher level quest that you were supposed to do about level 25 and you complete it at, like, level 12 or 13, then, like, don't you deserve, like, more of a reward? Because, like, for you it was harder, but you did it anyway. So, yeah, it was harder for you, and you probably had to spend more ammunition and more stimpaks to do it, but the reward you get is less, which is backwards. That's the one thing I think really needs to be rethought in Fallout 76, the way that, the level ties of unique items works, because that doesn't work at all for me. Hi John, could you give us your best joke? Oh, you've probably already heard it because it's just my cheese-related jokes, but my favourite of the cheese-related jokes, and you will have heard this before, but whatever, is what cheese do you use to get a bear out of a tree? Come on, bear. I love that joke. John, a few months ago I asked you what the deal was with Benor. Since your answer didn't satisfy me, I started watching your Skyrim playthrough, and I can only say, how could you, John? How could you? Oh, the wonderful extended saga of Benor. What a wonderful thing that was. One of the things that really worries me about Fallout 76 is the lack of choice and consequence, and what I've seen so far on the beta hasn't done anything to calm those fears. It seems like because of the nature of the quest system and the multiplayer aspect, the player's actions aren't going to be able to have much of an impact on the world, because you can't do situations such as destroying Megaton or wiping out a faction, because that would ruin it for other players who haven't gotten that far in the story. Am I missing something, and what are your thoughts on this? If choice and consequence and the world shifting based upon the things you do is absolutely essential to you and your enjoyment of the game, then yes, you might well have an issue with certain aspects of Fallout 76. Though, you know, there are things that kind of do work like that. Like, though it's only a temporary thing, being able to nuke an area and have that, you know, be a massive mushroom cloud that everyone can see across the map, and that creating a massive radioactive stretch of land where only people properly prepared to actually go into it can actually get inside, then yeah, I suppose you could argue that was choice and consequence. You've literally chosen to nuke an area, and now it's a nuclear hellscape for a certain period of time, which, you know, is in some ways sort of interesting, but to my mind, that's not the only thing that makes a good game, having a choice and seeing the impact that that causes upon the world. Like, in some ways, Fallout 76 is kind of backwards from that, which is the world has already made its choice. A bunch of people in the 20 years you were in the vault made a series of choices that led to everyone ending up dead. So, you know, the choices were made before you came out of the vault. The consequence now is everyone's dead, civilization failed, savagery won. And what you're doing in the game is trying to figure out how it happened. You know, going through ruined buildings, finding holotapes, reading terminals, finding notes, trying to construct what happened. And I'm okay with that, because some of my favourite Fallout storytelling is precisely like that, where you're not actively going in there to try and change something. You know, I'm not going into a building in order to convert it to my faction or whatever. I'm going into a ruined building because it's an interesting building where there was, like, you know, a corpse with a mysterious note on the outside. So I go inside to figure out, okay, why is he there? Why did he come to this building? What was this building pre-war? Was he coming after a particular treasure? What was the treasure actually? Was it really here? Who else came for it previously? Okay, the treasure was actually this pre-war bit of technology, but it wasn't here because of this, that, and the other. But actually, there was this conspiracy theory, which I found by logging into this terminal and kind of hacking the security and, like, sneaking into this back room with my lockpicking skill, that says, actually, the boss of the company stole the technology and he buried it at this location, so now I can go and get my shovel and dig it up, and now I've got a thing. Like, there's no real choice and consequence there, aside from you've now got one item that you didn't have before, but that's some of my favourite Fallout storytelling, like going into a broken down building and figuring out what happened. And that's what 76 is basically on a ridiculously giant scale. This is going into a broken universe and figuring out what happened. Like, how everyone managed to mess up so badly that they were literally killed to the last man and there's no one left alive in the entirety of West Virginia. I personally find that really interesting, but you're right, there's not really choice and consequence there because the world's already dead. But for me, doing the autopsy is one of my favourite things in Fallout, so I'm cool with that. What is your most cherished memory with Claire? Ooh, that's a really interesting question. Like, in different ways and for different reasons, I could say all sorts of things to this. Maybe one that sticks out to me a little bit is, like, the day we moved into this place where we are right now, which was the first place we probably, like, got together that's ours, and... yeah, I remember, there was boxes everywhere and we hadn't, like, unpacked anything yet, but we got pizza in. I just remember we just kind of, we'd had a big, long, stressful day. We moved into this place and we were together and it was our place. And, yeah, we were just sitting on the sofa having a hug and we had pizza. And that was very, very nice indeed. I know it's kind of, a fairly, mild, everyday thing, I suppose. But it was, it was a big thing for us. So that was kind of nice. John, when looting corpses in 76, do other players also get to loot the same corpse, or is it you snooze, you lose? No, corpses act as if they were containers. Every container is unique to you. So if one person dies, then all 4 people can go up to it and loot it. However, there seems to be a system in place where if you weren't involved in the killing, there's nothing on the corpse. So I think you can't just follow around another team, just like, slightly out of sight, mopping up all of the corpses that they're actually dropping for you. I think if you are part of a team, even if only one member kills the corpse, then the other 3 can go up to the corpse. Though I haven't verified that myself, it might be that only that person, like, you need to contribute. Like, like the same rules that apply if, like, NPCs are fighting each other in Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Like, if you're involved in the fight, like, you do a certain percentage of the damage that kills one of the people, you get the XP, but if you don't get involved, you don't get any XP at all. It might be like that, where you need to contribute a certain amount to the kill in order to be able to loot the corpse. But I doubt it's like that, because that would really screw over people who went for charisma and decided to be support classes and focus more on healing and buffing and debuffing enemies and whatnot. So I'll need to look into that, but it does rather appear from me just kind of, out of interest, tending a couple of people at one point just to see what happened. If I didn't get involved in their fights and they took a bunch of kind of just some scorched down, when I looked at those scorched corpses, there was nothing on the corpses. So you need to actually get involved in the fight if you want to get any loot off the body, by the looks of it. But it is unique to each individual person, so don't be afraid to just loot everything. John, I recently rediscovered my love for Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 with OpenRCT2, and I just stumbled across your old Roller Coaster Tycoon videos. Would you think of another series? Oh, absolutely. Not right now, because we're very busy, but 100% would I consider doing a Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, or maybe even Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 video, because, yeah, those are some good games. John, I followed your example in the Fallout 76 beta and went out on my own, but I headed northwest and found Deathclaw Islands. I'm guessing that didn't end well for you, Jamie. If you had the chance to add any mechanic or activity to a future Fallout game, what would be your choice? Ooh, interesting idea. So one of the things I liked in Fallout 4 was the idea of the charisma perks where you could make humans and animals and abominations like surrender and then potentially even like, join your side. I take that a little bit further and have like, proper animal taming where if you invested really heavily into charisma and the relevant perks and whatever, you actually had the ability to not just force a creature to stop or flee or join your side, but you could actually convert them into like a temporary companion where effectively you'd have a tame Deathclaw that would like, follow you around for a certain period of time. Though to avoid it getting ridiculous, probably he'd have like a roaming range, so he'd only be allowed to go so far from where he lives before he decides to just naff off back to his home. But he wouldn't attack you on the way back out, of course. He'd just be neutral to you until he actually got back to where he started. So I suppose that's quite similar to the mechanism that was already in Fallout 4. I just felt like that didn't quite work well enough. So I'd prefer like, a more interesting, specific animal taming mechanism involving like, putting out some bait and, feeding them the right food and knowing the right way to approach them. And maybe, like, for certain creatures, you need to do something like, asserting dominance over them. Whereas other creatures, you need to, like, show them kindness and feed them. And then they'll be on your side or whatever. there might be some fun stuff you could do there, I think. What did you think of the YouTube premiere thing? That weird countdown with the odd music really threw me off. I didn't know that was coming. YouTube put up this video talking about, and just watched the tutorial that gave me like the introduction to premieres for creators, and like it didn't mention that at all, the weird music. Like, why wouldn't I get to choose the music, or like be given the option to insert my own like 2-minute countdown thing? But I wasn't given the option to. And like, it's really interesting because what I've basically seen across like loads of YouTube channels that I've followed is loads of people being like, hey, there's this new premiere thing, we're going to try that. Followed immediately afterwards by, that was weird, we're not going to do that again. Like, I think the only time I'd really do it is for like special occasions. And 400,000 subscribers is coming up. So whatever I decide to do for that, and I have a couple of ideas in mind, I might actually do a premiere for that, because that's like, you know, a special event, so that makes sense. And maybe like the channel birthday cooking video, I might do that as a premiere, because that's a special event. But I think aside from like real specials, it'll be a really rare thing. I don't think we'll be doing it other than that. As we're coming up to NaNoWriMo, could you give us a dramatic reading of some of your creative writing? Unfortunately, I haven't written anything in terms of like creative writing for... it must be years at this point. Like, it kind of just completely fell off after I started doing YouTube stuff. Because for me, it wasn't so much like I was desperately wedded to like the idea of writing a book. I just wanted to do something creative in my spare time because my job was very dry and full of numbers and whatnot. So I just needed to do something a bit creative just to, you know, keep my brain from shriveling up and drying out and what have you. But since I started doing this, like, I've barely done any creative writing at all. Like, when was the last NaNoWriMo I did? Like, I think I did like, maybe 5 of them after I came to London. At least 5 years, probably. Maybe it's 5 years odd since I've actually written anything. So I've not really got anything to share, to be honest. I'm very sorry about that. And as for the stuff that I did write 5 years ago, quite frankly, I'm embarrassed by the vast majority of it. It's probably really bad, which isn't a bad thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with, like, you know, writing kind of bad stuff. Writing bad stuff is fine. Like, you only become a good writer by writing bad stuff. But maybe you don't actually want to look back at that bad stuff later. I have no idea where it bloody is. Because I think it used to be stored on the old grey laptop. No, that can't be the old grey laptop. That thing's dead. I must have moved over to one of the... it must be on one of the... yeah, the red laptop? The red laptop I stopped using because its battery life was appalling. Possibly. I don't even know. Right, I'll try and remember to dig some of it out at some point. Oh dear. Oh, maybe I'll do it at some point for like a big anniversary. Oh, I'm going to regret saying that out loud. Like that. That and the other... no, don't even mention it. Okay, never mind. Let's just move straight on. John, have Ubisoft figured anything out about sending you code for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or is that pretty much a lost cause at this point? I'm guessing it is. I'm guessing they just decided they didn't want me to have it. And Rockstar didn't want me to have Red Dead Redemption 2 either. We wrote to them. They said, hey, you're on the press list. We'll get you code nice and early so you can have a video ready for launch day. They didn't. This is just one of the weird things about, like, some companies, which is they, like, have multiple different people doing this sort of thing, so the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, which is why some companies, where there's one person whose, like, sole job it is to, like, you know, speak to YouTubers and speak to the press and make sure everybody, like, you know, code requests get sent out, and you request the code, and the code gets sent to you nice and early, like, say, Square Enix have, they're very easy to work with. But, like, yeah, Ubisoft and Rockstar are weird, which is, you know, you can email them and they can say, oh, yeah, totally, Warren, 100% get your code, and then you'll never get it because the person who just replied to you isn't the person who actually handles the code. And, like, I don't know what happened to the list that I was supposed to be on, but actually, it was really weird for Red Dead 2. Because Red Dead 2, like, it went to everybody. Like, you know, I was noticing this when I was discussing this with some other YouTubers. Like, you know, really small Twitch streamers with, like, you know, a couple of 100 followers on Twitch. They got Red Dead Redemption 2 early and were streaming it ahead of launch. And we didn't. We didn't get it. So, I don't know if we've annoyed someone. Like, I literally went back through my catalogue thinking, okay, have I at some point said something to upset Rockstar? Like, did I ever say anything against GTA 5 or anything? And I couldn't think of anything, so I don't know if we just fell off the bottom of a list or something, but we sent them a chasing email, like, on the day of the launch, and we didn't hear anything, so I just bought it instead, because, you know, it's a really interesting, fun, well-put-together, beautiful game, so I just kind of wanted to experience it regardless, so whatever. And I'll probably end up doing that with Assassin's Creed Odyssey as well. Like, you know, as I'm so busy at the minute, I might just kind of do, like, a little mini-series, like, in the new year. Like, it'll probably go on sale at some point or other, so I'll probably pick it up when it does that. John, have you ever come across YouTuber Triangle City's Fallout New Vegas Cutting Room Floor series? Not all of it, but I'm sure I've seen a bit of that at some point. My brain's telling me I have, but I can't remember when exactly. But yes, it's all about cut content, including dev interviews, a must-watch for all Fallout New Vegas nerds. Do you think we'll ever get a Fallout game showing the Legion as they'd been planned? Well, it's not impossible, of course, because bear in mind, the Legion weren't actually originally, like, exclusively designed for Fallout New Vegas. They were going to be part of the cancelled original plans for Fallout 3. So, you know, their design had been knocking around previously. There's nothing to say that they might not show up again later. I mean, if there's one thing the Fallout franchise does do, and in some people's opinion does too much of, it's that they actually kind of, you know, keep the same ideas kind of knocking around. So, you know, for example, in Fallout 76, some people were unhappy that the Brotherhood showed up because, you know, the Brotherhood had only been recently founded on the West Coast. They found it a bit odd that they'd be on the East Coast. You know, they hand-waved that in 76 by saying, oh yeah, Max and, like, Found are still operating satellite and broadcast a message. So, like, other members of, like, you know, the former US Army decided to also use the name Brotherhood of Steel, etc., etc. So, you know, you can hand-wave that stuff away pretty easily, but some people felt, okay, the Brotherhood are only in there because the Brotherhood's a Fallout-y thing, and Bethesda loves putting Fallout-y things that are really recognisable into Fallout games. So, you know, the Legion are pretty recognisable. You know, they're very unique. So, you know, it's entirely possible they might make an appearance again for that reason. So, we'll have to see. John, what do you think about Bethesda claiming the entire reason for not including human NPCs in 76 is so when you hear gunfire, you know it's another player? Okay, that's interesting, and as you're going to point out, the existence of Scorch and super mutants who actually use guns and might end up doing so against other NPCs completely nullifies that. I haven't seen the original quote you're referring to, so I can't comment on that because I don't know the exact wording that Bethesda used, but if that is an accurate representation of what they said, yeah, that definitely doesn't quite stack up. Because there have actually been multiple occasions while I've been playing 76 where I've literally, like, while I've been in, like, my Pip-Boy or, like, you know, just doing stuff in my base, I've come out of what I've been doing in order to actually go over to the map because I heard gunfire nearby, and what it actually was say, just like, you know, a bunch of ferals walked too close to some Scorch and they started fighting each other because, and I do like this by the way, in 76, just like in 3, there are crowds of enemies that just wander around, they're not tied to a particular location. If they kind of wander close to each other, they will totally attack each other. So the Wasteland feels a bit alive in that regard, which I do quite like. Because, yeah, I always liked in Fallout 3 how creatures would just randomly roam around and you just kind of, you know, you'd see fights happening in the distance. Creatures would just attack each other and, you know, random slavers would attack wildlife and super mutants would attack Talon Company mercs and diddly-diddly-dee. And, you know, some of it happened totally organically. And that sort of stuff happens in 76 as well, which is really cool. It's very, very cool indeed. But, yeah, the gunfire thing definitely doesn't make sense because there's a lot of enemies that will use guns against other NPCs. So there have been multiple occasions when I've not been sure whether a human is nearby or not, and I've had to double check there are no humans nearby just to be sure. John, in Generation 1, what level did you evolve your Eevee? Please give separate answers for yellow and red-blue. I never owned yellow or red, I only owned blue. And, okay, I've got a confession to make. And you're not going to like me for this because it's a two-part bad confession. I did a bad thing, which is I took my Eevee and I immediately evolved it into a Flareon. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Alright? I hadn't done my research. This was in the age before you could just look stuff up online. I didn't know how much Flareon sucked. Okay? I'm so sorry. Also, how do you feel about Pokemon having their movesets change between red, blue, and yellow, like Nidoran having its double kick move from level 43 to level 12, which was a ridiculous buff as it meant you could get both Nidoran's best move and a stage 2 Pokemon at the end of Mount Moon, and then just choose the rest of the game. That wasn't so much what annoyed me, actually, about Yellow. The thing that really annoyed me about Yellow was, you know, the whole setup for Yellow, if you're kind of, you know, saying, okay, this is going to be the game that more closely mirrors the TV series is, Ash had a really difficult time against Brock. because, Pikachu at that point only has normal electric attacks, and electric attacks can't hurt Onix or Geodude, and normal attacks will do nothing against their high defense. So Pikachu's kind of worthless there. So you think, okay, that's actually sort of interesting, because the same thing shows up in Red and Blue if you pick Charmander. So if you pick Charmander, he's potentially going to struggle a lot against Geodude and Onix as well. And, there wasn't really a good option there. Like, Pidgey doesn't learn anything particularly useful, and then there's Spearow and the Nidorans, they're not particularly useful. And then you've got, Weedle and Caterpie aren't going to be able to do anything. Like, if you're lucky, maybe a Weedle could, poison it. That would probably be the best you could hope for. They're getting some poison on it and just slowly wear it down with bug bites like that, quite literally in the case of Weedle. But that's what I really liked about Red and Blue. They were brutal. They were brutal in that regard. Like, if you picked Charmander, you were in for a hard time. And, generally, if I wanted to pick Charmander, I would end up basically catching a Caterpie and getting it up to a level 12 Butterfree so it learnt Confusion. And that thing might be dumped pretty soon afterwards. As soon as you get to Cerulean City, there are a lot of good Pokemon up to the north and the south. So, you can get a lot of better Pokemon at that point. And at that point, yeah, you probably just get rid of Butterfree, full stop, never used again. But, you actually have to properly get something and train its level 12 to give yourself a chance. Because otherwise, there's a good chance Brock could just flipping destroy you, because it was genuinely difficult. But Yellow just, made it stupidly easy. It wasn't just that, it was, weren't there Mankeys? Could you get, a Mankey in Yellow on, Route whatever it's called, just to the left of, Viridian City? So you could get a Mankey and that had low kick and whatever. Yeah, that's what really bugged me. The fact that it really felt like Yellow should have been really difficult. It should have been a difficult fight, but actually, they just gifted you the Pokemon that made it incredibly easy. And I think Onix had its level lowered as well, didn't it? Because Onix in Red and Blue was level 14 and the Geodude was level 12. But in Yellow, I think that was actually lowered down to 10 and 12, or maybe even 9 and 11. I can't remember, but it really bugged me that, this was the special edition that was supposed to be about, the TV series and closely following the TV series, and it made it much easier than in Red and Blue, which was, no, boo, I say. Yeah, I didn't agree with those changes. John, I'm going to have my wisdom teeth removed tomorrow. Have you ever had any teeth problems? No, I've been really lucky. Because I've also not really taken proper care of my teeth, which is occasionally I go for very long periods without visiting a dentist. Then I bother to remember to go to a dentist. And every time I actually eventually have got around to it, I've been very lucky because the dentist has immediately said, oh, no, you're actually fine. You know what? We'll just give them a bit of a clean, but basically you're okay. So I've been remarkably lucky. But that's probably because I don't have much sugar these days. I drink a lot less tea than I used to because I had sugar in my tea. So I don't have that much sugar in my diet, which probably helps quite a lot. Question for Editing Claire. I know you like the Sawbones podcast. I was wondering if A, you've read their book, and if so, what you thought of it, and B, if you listen to any of the other McElroy podcasts. Personally, I really like The Adventure Zone, which is live play tabletop podcast. Over to Editing Claire for that one.
I don't have the Sawbones book yet, but I definitely want to get it soon. I love a good medical history book, and I also saw some of the illustrations for the Sawbones book online, and they look really, really great, so that's definitely something that I want to get soon. As for other McElroy shows, I am interested in them, but they have such a big backlog and my kind of audio listening time is fairly limited, and I'm trying to keep up with some audiobooks that I already have, as well as a substantial amount of other podcasts as well. So it's more of I'm interested in checking those out if I ever kind of run out of stuff to listen to. It's more of a kind of long list type of thing that I'm interested in listening to.
Been enjoying the new Red Dead series, but it seems to me the new stamina bar, or rather core, drains rather quickly, and it looks like the only way to get it back up is to stop to eat food. Does that get annoying or take you out of the gameplay? It depends what you're after in a game. Red Dead 2 is fascinating, because it's so different to Red Dead 1. Okay, aesthetically, they look very similar. And, once you get into a fight, they're very similar. But, in terms of, game speed and progression and mechanics and even genre, they're so different. Because Red Dead 1 is actually pretty arcadey, for the most part. It's very simple. For the most part, you've got, one bar. And that's your Deadeye meter. Okay, health is just regenerating and represented by the edges of the screen, getting red or bloody or whatever. When you're on a horse, you've got 2 bars to worry about. Horse stamina and Deadeye. Horse stamina just comes back naturally over time. Deadeye, you spend by using Deadeye, you get it back by shooting people manually. That was basically all you needed to keep your eye on, aside from just, making sure you had enough ammo, but then you were carrying around 10 million guns you could swap between at any time, so that didn't really matter either. It was a very arcadey experience. Red Dead 2 is totally different. It is a hardcore flipping cowboy simulator where things are slow and measured, and you need to do your prep and brush your horse and eat your vegetables, otherwise you'll develop scurvy. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating game. I've never played a game quite like it, and it's such a surprise after Red Dead 1 because they're so flipping different. I need to be in the right mood for it. That's the thing. It's not a game I can play like all the time. If I play it in the wrong mood, I would find it really slow. But if I'm in just the right mood and I'm in the mood to just kind of, play slowly and chill out and enjoy the story, it doesn't really bug me at all. But it's such a fascinating game, Red Dead 2. So interesting. John, what do you think about people who've been saying that Bethesda are being untruthful about wanting the 76 beta to be a stress test, but only allowing pre-orders in? Wouldn't they want everyone to try it? Not necessarily, or rather not at first. Like, I think, the story they've given strikes me as eminently reasonable, which is you start small and you work up. So the first time they ever actually let this game outside of their own internal, studio environment was, I was there. It was at West Virginia, where they'd set it up in these rooms where, we were all in, little teams of 4, but we were all in the same session. So that was the first ever time they'd actually taken this out to an external location and let other people play it. And there were absolutely some problems. We had some small connection problems on my side. We struggled to kind of get people hooked together and into the same session. And we needed to do a bit of, tinkering and poking around in the back end to get it all together. So, even when the number of people in the entire universe that was playing the game was about, 24 or something, at that point, there were still technical problems they were starting to work through. After that point, they had, the secret little pre-beta stress test, which was only for a small number of hand-picked people. They never said how many that was, but obviously it was more than 24. So, that was, again, scaling it up slightly. And all of a sudden, these were people actually in their own homes. Then they had the beta that was just for the Xbox. Okay, so that's an expansion again, but you've only got the one console. So that's, more people there. Then you bring in all the Xbox and all the PC and all the PS4 people, all in one go, just the pre-order people still, of course, for the main beta. And you start off small, and then you increase that to longer and larger sessions to see how the servers kind of deal with that sort of business. And then, of course, that leads up to the launch itself, which is coming up very, very soon indeed. So, personally, I don't really see the problem with that, really. I mean, that's probably how you'd want to arrange a series of stress tests on a server if you are really about to tax your servers more than you've ever had your servers being taxed before in their lives. That strikes me as a fairly natural order of play and escalation of things. And another raised issue from the same person, those customers who pre-order can carry over their experience to the main game, where they'll have an advantage over the day one buyers. Yes and no, because it's not really strictly a competitive game in that sense. Okay, fine, technically you don't have as good equipment or armor or whatever as the people who have been playing a little bit already, but one, it's mainly a PvE game. PvP is just a small optional side thing you do. And two, and potentially more interesting to the specific point you've raised, though this isn't something I've investigated myself in great detail, there is some element of normalization to armor or damage. I've not looked into this in great detail yet, but I know for a fact it's a thing. I know the intended end result is, in the event where a level 10 chooses to duel a level 60, the level 60 person will still have an advantage, but it won't be a total flipping walkover. There'll be some level of normalization between them, so the level 10 has, a chance. I don't know exactly how it's been done, I haven't had a chance to dig into this at all, but even if you're going in exclusively for PvP, the fact that some people are going to be a slightly higher level than you probably isn't going to make that much difference at all as soon as you've got your absolute basics set up. Once the beta's done, do you know if the Fallout 76 servers will be cross-platform? No. They almost definitely won't. There's been no indication of that so far. In fact, they've been pretty clear on the fact they're going to keep them all locked separately. I don't see why Xbox and PS4 shouldn't be allowed to play together. To be honest, I can see why you'd want to keep PC separate, just because keyboard and mouse versus controller, though I personally prefer to just use controllers in either case, just because I enjoy VATS and I enjoy Melee, and both of them work just fine on a controller anyways. But at the moment there's no plan to do that, and yeah, you can't actually build a character on PC and then play them on Xbox as well. These are separate editions of the same game. I'm not aware of any way to move over save files, and I've not heard any information that suggests you might be able to in future. And a Fallout 76 collab request that's quite frankly a little bit on the optimistic side here. This is a suggestion that I should play Fallout 76 with Felicia Day, which would be absolutely lovely. I'm not sure she's quite in the same league as me in terms of, you know, internet fame and whatever, so I'm not really sure that's gonna be viable. That might be a bit too much to hope for. Indeed, the same person asked if I'd ever actually watched The Guild. I watched the first season of it. It's a long time ago now. I remember quite enjoying it. I'm not sure how it's aged, but yeah, I only watched it once through like a long time ago. But I remember enjoying it at the time. John, are you familiar with the term hoisted by your own petard? Yes, it's Shakespearean in fact, and it is a rather lovely little idiom. I do like it. It's a lovely turn of phrase. Have you ever noticed that every time you ping VATS in 76, it drains your AP, even if there's nothing to find? Do you think this balances the game or is just faff? I hadn't actually noticed that. So, yeah, that's probably because I tended to invest in, like, Action Girl really early on, so for me, the action bar just fills up again almost immediately. I had not noticed that, so I'll need to look into that, but yeah, to my mind, I don't think it really makes much of a difference, because it's so minimal, I hadn't even seen it happening. And would it be a good idea to do question submissions externally to Patreon, like a Google form or something, so YouTube sponsors could also submit, potentially via sharing the question in the VIP lounge on Discord? You know what, I'd be totally up for the YouTube, like, members or sponsors or whatever YouTube decides to call them today, being allowed to actually ask questions and accessing the Patroncast. That strikes me as eminently reasonable. In fact, actually, I think there's a fair bit of overlap. I'm sure I've seen quite a few people who are patrons also being YouTube sponsors. So for the small number of people who are actually, you know, still exactly the same way as on Patreon, they are just kind of, you know, regular, recurring, donation-y people, that strikes me as eminently reasonable. So that's actually a question from Thomas, so I'll probably take that up with Thomas, yeah, at some point this month, see if we can arrange something. But that strikes me as eminently fair. The people who are donating on a regular basis through YouTube itself should actually be allowed to access the Patroncast. Yes, that seems eminently reasonable. And in fact, the final question today gets to go to Editing Claire, not to me. So one question for Editing Claire. I seem to remember you're a fan of musicals. I was wondering if you'd ever seen Heathers. I've personally fallen deeply in love with it. Over to you, Claire.
Yes, I do love musicals, and I know some of my friends have seen the production of Heathers that's in London right now and absolutely love it. So I would definitely be interested in seeing that if like a group of my friends are going or something like that. It's not something that's so high up on my list that I'm going to make plans to go and see it on my own, but I'd definitely be open to it. I do need to see Company first, though. I'm super excited for Company.
And on that, ladies and gentlemen, we are done. Let's wrap things up here. I'm very, very tired indeed, but my day is not over. I've actually got to, you know, edit that Fallout that I recorded up to, I think I was recording up to about 2 a.m. last night or thereabouts. So I've got to get on with editing some of that very, very sadly indeed. So back to the grindstone for me. We have got more videos to edit. Hope you've enjoyed the Patroncast. Hope you decide to hang around because, of course, there'll be another Patroncast next month, as there is every month, because the Patroncast is love and joy and so on. And thank you all, of course, so very, very much for hanging around just in general, because without Patreon, I don't know what we do. Because YouTube ads revenue is all over the shop at any given day. So thank you all so very, very much for hanging around, because you are the people that actually keeps this whole business going. So thank you very, very much indeed for that. Hopefully, I will see you next month for the next Patroncast. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nut, and this has been the October sort of 2018 Patroncast. Thank you very much, and goodbye.